I'm Felicity Rose, and at 26, I learned your future can be stolen by the people who are supposed to protect it. I spent 3 years saving for one thing, a historic waterfront venue for my wedding to a man who loved me. I paid the deposit from my own hard-earned money. I planned every detail down to the antique table linens. But when the day finally came, I was not wearing a white dress. I was wearing canvas work trousers and steel-toed boots. And I was standing on the inside of a wrought iron gate, holding a heavy brass padlock. On the other side of the bars stood my mother, Vivian. She wore a blush silk designer gown. Her manicured fingers gripped the black iron so hard her knuckles turned white. Behind her, a line of town cars and luxury vehicles idled on the cobblestones. Impatient horns cut through the heavy coastal air. Spanish moss swayed from the old oak trees above us. "Felicity, open this gate right now," Vivian demanded. Her voice cracked. She dropped the measured southern drawl she had spent decades cultivating. "You are humiliating us." I did not raise my voice. I slipped the silver key into my pocket and looked at the woman who had spent my entire life weighing my worth on a scale of social utility. "I am just securing the property, Vivian," I said. I turned my back on her and walked up the gravel drive while the wedding guests continued to honk. By the time I reached the main house, I still had not seen the look on my older sister, Caroline's face. Welcome back to Vega Vengeance, where ordinary women face impossible family betrayals and answer them with a steady hand instead of a raised voice. If you have ever been told to keep the peace while someone else burned your life to the ground, you are in the right place. Drop a comment with your age and let me know where you are listening from today. To understand how I ended up locking my own family out of the Charleston Society wedding of the decade, you have to rewind 6 months. It was a Tuesday in April. I walked into the sun-drenched, antique-filled parlor of Vivian's downtown home. I expected a final fitting for my wedding dress. The seamstress was supposed to arrive at noon. Instead, I found Vivian and my sister Caroline sitting on the velvet settee. A silver ice bucket sweated on the mahogany coffee table between them. Caroline held a mimosa in a crystal flute. My leather-bound wedding planner sat open on Vivian's lap. "Have a seat, Felicity," Vivian said. She did not look up from the pages. I stayed standing. The humid air of the room suddenly felt very thick. I asked where the seamstress was. Vivian smoothed a page down with her palm and ignored the question. "I spoke with the coordinator at Oakmont Estate this morning," Vivian said. "We transferred the October 12th date to Caroline." The words hung there. They felt foreign and heavy. I had booked Oakmont Estate 3 years in advance. It was a historic antebellum manor with original brickwork and sweeping verandas. In the strict old money hierarchies of Charleston, South Carolina, hosting your wedding at Oakmont was the pinnacle of prestige. I saved for the $25,000 non-refundable deposit by taking extra preservation consulting contracts. I spent 3 summers mapping decaying tabby foundations in the brutal July heat. I climbed scaffolding and inhaled plaster dust, while Caroline spent her summers vacationing in Europe. "You transferred my venue," I said. My tone remained flat. Caroline swirled her drink. The ice clinked against the glass. She offered a look of practiced, pitying grace. "Preston's parents are flying in their colleagues from Boston," Caroline explained. Preston was her fiancé. He was a prominent local surgeon. His family treated elite medical degrees like royal titles. They belonged to a highly competitive, prestige-obsessed culture that practically worshipped his surgical residency. They flew him on business-class flights and treated him to Michelin-star dinners. Meanwhile, they treated my career as a historical preservationist like a quaint little hobby. "We simply have to host a proper society event," Caroline said. "You understand." "Your sister is marrying into high society," Vivian added. Her tone suggested she was explaining a basic law of physics to a child. "She deserves the better day. You and Nathan can have a simple backyard gathering. You do not need the prestige, Felicity. It is just not your world." Nathan was my fiancé. He was a tech investor who wore plain gray shirts and drove a 5-year-old sedan. He never bragged about his portfolio. Vivian treated him like an unfortunate charity case. To her, we were secondary characters in Caroline's grand narrative. Growing up in that house meant learning to be invisible. If Caroline wanted the spotlight, Vivian made sure all the lamps were pointed at her. I thought my wedding would be the one day I was allowed to stand in the center of the room. I spent late nights researching the historical significance of Oakmont Estate. I traced the original property lines and studied the architectural blueprints. I fell in love with the history of the place. To Vivian, it was just a glamorous backdrop for society columns. When Vivian told me to have a backyard gathering, she was not just insulting my wedding. She was erasing my identity. She was looking at the man I loved and declaring him unworthy of celebration. Nathan never asked for their approval. He was quiet and observant. Vivian saw his modesty as a lack of ambition. She did not know that his venture capital firm managed assets worth more than Preston's entire family lineage. Nathan preferred to move through the world without drawing attention. He liked that I loved him for who he was, not what he could buy. The hypocrisy was a physical weight in the parlor. They draped their cruelty in polite Southern manners. They used the language of pragmatism to mask glaring, toxic favoritism. I looked closely at my mother. Her chin was lifted in defiance. She was daring me to throw a tantrum. But as she reached for her own champagne flute, her fingers trembled. That slight tremor betrayed her. This was not about Caroline's happiness. This was about Vivian's desperate, clawing need to show off to Charleston's elite socialites. She needed to prove she belonged among the old money families. She was willing to sacrifice my hard-earned savings to buy her ticket into their circle. I did not scream. I did not cry. I knew that throwing a fit would only give Vivian the excuse she needed to call me dramatic and unreasonable. I reached out and picked up my leather binder from her lap. I turned around and walked out the front door into the glaring afternoon sun. As I walked down the brick-paved sidewalk away from Vivian's house, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Nathan asking how the dress fitting went. I stopped under the shade of a magnolia tree and took a deep breath. I replied that there was a change of plans. I did not type out the betrayal. Some wounds need to be spoken out loud to become real. They mistook my silence for submission. They assumed I would just absorb the blow the way I always did. They thought I would quietly cancel my caterers and start looking for a tent to put in a backyard. They thought the matter was settled. What neither of them realized was that a historical preservationist knows exactly how to read a structural weakness. They stole my date and they stole my venue, but they did not bother to check who actually owned the ground they planned to stand on. They were busy planning a party while I was busy preparing a reckoning. I drove back to my carriage house. The tires of my truck crunched against the crushed oyster shell driveway. I had spent 2 years restoring the property. I pulled up the rotting floorboards myself. I treated the exposed brick and reinforced the load-bearing walls. I understood how to stabilize a structure that others deemed worthless. It was a sanctuary built on a solid foundation of honest labor. That was a concept my mother never understood. Nathan stood in the kitchen when I walked through the door. He wore his usual faded gray shirt. He held a ceramic mug of coffee. He took one look at my face and set the mug down on the soapstone counter. He noticed my empty hands. He asked where my leather binder was. I stood by the kitchen island and recounted the scene in the parlor. I told him about the crystal flute and the transferred date. I told him how Vivian looked me in the eye and handed my 3 years of savings to Caroline without a shred of guilt. Nathan did not yell. He did not punch a wall or curse. His reaction was a terrifying, quiet stillness. He absorbed the information like a grandmaster studying a chessboard. Before we could formulate a plan, the heavy oak front door swung open. Aunt Helene stepped inside. She is my late father's sister. She is a striking African-American woman who wears impeccably tailored suits and suffers zero fools. Helene never bought into Vivian's polished Southern Belle routine. When my father passed away years ago, Helene became my anchor. She was the only person in the family who saw my preservation career as a true calling instead of a dirty hobby. Helene set her leather tote on the granite counter. She took one look at the tension in the room and crossed her arms. "Tell me everything," she demanded. I repeated the story. Helene listened with a tight jaw. When I finished, she asked the most important question. How did Vivian authorize the transfer of a non-refundable $25,000 deposit without your explicit consent? I froze. The reality of the transaction hit me. Oakmont Estate required strict verification for any contract alterations. I opened my laptop and navigated to the venue portal. The system locked me out. My password was changed. I checked my primary inbox. There were no security alerts, no emails from the coordinator. Helene tapped her manicured nail against the counter. Think about the vulnerabilities, Felicity. What does Vivian still have access to? The realization hit my chest like a stone. The old family tablet. When I was in high school, we shared a cloud account for calendar syncing and application purchases. I abandoned it years ago, but my recovery email was still linked to the old server. I typed in the legacy credentials. The screen loaded. My inbox populated with intercepted messages. There was the email from Oakmont Estate. There was the contract transfer request. And there was the final confirmation. I clicked on the attached document. It was a digital release form reassigning the date and the funds to Caroline. At the bottom of the page sat my signature. It was not a clumsy forgery. It was a perfect digital copy of my electronic signature lifted from an old tax document stored on the shared drive. Vivian had not just stolen my wedding date. She had committed wire fraud. She forged my identity on a binding legal contract to siphon my hard-earned savings directly into Caroline's wedding account. This escalated the conflict from a toxic family dispute into a felony. Aunt Helene leaned over my shoulder and read the screen. Her eyes narrowed. Your mother just handed you the rope. Now we let her tie the knot. I looked up at Nathan. The modest software developer facade vanished. The quiet guy who drove an old sedan was suddenly replaced by the man who negotiated 8-figure buyouts before breakfast. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a single number. Get over here, Nathan said. Bring your laptop. 20 minutes later, Maya walked through our door. Maya is Nathan's senior corporate counsel. She is sharp and pragmatic. She wore a pristine white blazer and carried a sleek leather briefcase. My family thought Nathan was a low-level programmer. They had no idea his venture capital firm managed assets worth more than Preston's entire medical lineage. Maya handled the heavy legal lifting for his complex acquisitions. Nathan briefed her on the situation. Maya reviewed the forged document on my screen. She checked the digital timestamps and the server logs. We have a clear case of identity theft and fraud, Maya said. Her voice was calm and measured. We could notify the authorities right now. We could call the venue and invalidate the contract today. I nodded. I wanted to burn Vivian's plans to the ground immediately. But Maya held up a hand. If we attack the venue booking today, Vivian has time to recover, Maya explained. She will play the victim. She will cry to the police and claim it was a simple misunderstanding between a mother and daughter over shared finances. She will drag it out in civil court. Meanwhile, Caroline will just find another historic location. They will escape the social ruin they truly deserve. We need them locked into Oakmont. We need them to spend their money and invite their high society guests. Aunt Helene smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. You want a decoy. Exactly, Maya said. We send a red herring. We draft a formal legal demand letter strictly requesting the return of the $25,000. We cite the unauthorized financial transfer, but we do not mention the police. We do not mention the venue date. We keep it strictly about the cash. I understood the strategy. We would give Vivian a minor threat to focus on. We would let her think my only recourse was a petty financial squabble. We would make her feel victorious. We drafted the letter that afternoon. It was a sterile corporate document demanding restitution within 30 days. Maya sent it via certified mail. The bait was set. We waited for the reaction. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name. I let the call go to voicemail. I sat at the kitchen island with Nathan and Helene. I pressed speakerphone. Vivian's voice echoed through the quiet carriage house. She sounded highly amused. Felicity, I received your dramatic little letter, Vivian cooed. The condescension dripped from every syllable. Honestly, trying to sue your own mother over a wedding budget reallocation? You are acting like a spoiled child. You should be grateful I handled the cancellation logistics for you. Caroline is already booking the florists. We are finalizing the luxury caterer tomorrow. Do not expect an invitation if you keep up this petty behavior. Grow up and stop embarrassing yourself. The voicemail clicked off. The silence in the room was heavy with anticipation. She practically admitted to taking the funds on a recorded line, Helene pointed out. More importantly, Nathan added, she thinks she won. Vivian and Caroline focused all their defensive energy on ignoring my letter. They began shuffling their bank assets to hide the money. They mocked my attempt to fight back. They felt untouchable. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality of their situation. They thought they had successfully stolen my dream and left me with nothing. That complacency was exactly what we needed. They were busy protecting a fraction of the budget, while we were preparing to pull the entire foundation out from under them. My mother wanted to play a game of real estate and prestige. She was about to learn what happened when you challenge a preservationist and a venture capitalist. The forged signature was just the first piece of evidence. The next step required a much larger investment. We needed to ensure that when Caroline showed up in her white dress, she would have nowhere to stand. I looked at Nathan, and he already knew what I was thinking. The game was no longer about getting my deposit back. The game was about buying the board. Monday morning arrived alongside a torrential coastal downpour. Rain hammered against the tin roof above my carriage house. I sat near the dining table, surrounded by architectural blueprints and municipal tax records. Maya sat across from me. She spent her entire weekend digging into various corporate shell companies governing Charleston's historic properties. She possessed a predatory legal mind. Where others viewed majestic antebellum columns, she perceived liability structures and operational deficits. We were not relying on some fairy tale trope. Nathan held incredible wealth, but his venture capital firm never authorized 8-figure acquisitions merely to satisfy personal vendettas. His partners required cold, hard business logic. They demanded a proven return on investment. If we wanted to take control over Oakmont Estate, we had to prove the property functioned as a distressed asset ripe for lucrative turnaround. Maya handed me a thick stack of printed financial disclosures. The parent organization managing the manor bled cash daily. They operated beneath a veil of high society prestige, yet their ledger told a story regarding catastrophic mismanagement. They owe 3 years of back taxes, Maya explained. They ignored transient lodging tariffs. The city cited them twice recently for failing to maintain structural integrity within the main ballroom. They remain one severe hurricane away from total bankruptcy. The current owners are desperate to liquidate quietly before regional banks seize the deed. I pulled those municipal citations toward my chair. This represented my professional domain. Vivian constantly belittled my career. She told her country club friends I played with dirty bricks. She failed to comprehend that historical preservation throughout South Carolina functioned as a highly profitable industry if you knew how to navigate federal tax credits and heritage grants. I spent the next 48 hours building an exhaustive acquisition dossier. I evaluated the failing plasterwork along with the compromised foundation. I detailed the exact rot consuming the heart pine floorboards and the decay threatening the grand, sweeping verandas. I cross-referenced city violations using my personal network of specialized contractors who knew how to source historically accurate lime mortar and period-specific materials. I drafted a restoration timeline designed to bring the building up to modern commercial code while maintaining strict historical registry status. I calculated the precise cost associated with repairs against projected revenue generated by transforming Oakmont into an exclusive boutique resort. The arithmetic proved undeniable. Current management severely undervalued the estate because they lacked specialized knowledge required to fix it. I possessed that exact expertise. On Wednesday evening, I presented the binder to Nathan. He sat on our living room sofa reviewing every single page. He wore his wire-rimmed reading glasses. He analyzed those spreadsheets and structural risk assessments carefully. He never treated this like a favor granted to a wounded partner. He addressed me like a managing director pitching a legitimate corporate buyout. Nathan runs the distressed real estate division inside his company. He built his stellar reputation by identifying failing enterprises and restructuring their physical assets. He respects competence above all else. That was why Vivian hated him. She could never manipulate a man who valued substance over superficial charm. Nathan closed the heavy binder and removed his glasses. He looked at me with deep, profound admiration. "Your restoration budget is brilliant," he stated. "You factored in government heritage grants to offset massive repair costs. This is not just some viable purchase. This represents a highly lucrative acquisition. You found an absolute goldmine, Felicity." He did not buy the manner to play the macho hero. He backed the buyout because he fundamentally believed in my vision. My mother considered my career a joke. My future husband recognized it as a multi-million-dollar advantage. That level of quiet, unwavering support mended a fragile piece of my heart that Vivian had spent decades chipping away. Nathan authorized Maya to begin the quiet acquisition immediately. Maya operated with lethal efficiency. She established a blind, limited liability corporation to shield our identities from public record. She approached Oakmont's desperate owners, offering a fast, aggressive cash proposal. They were drowning in massive debt and terrified of public ruin. They accepted the terms within 24 hours. The paperwork was drafted swiftly. Funds were securely escrowed. The transition of power moved silently through bureaucratic channels across Charleston. Current management remained legally bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement during the transition period. To the outside world, Oakmont Estate continued operating normally. Behind closed doors, the entire foundation was shifting beneath their feet. While Maya handled closing documents, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was another voicemail from Vivian. I played the message on speakerphone, allowing Nathan and Aunt Helene to hear. Vivian sounded exasperated. Her tone dripped with weaponized maternal concern. "Felicity, you really need to call your lawyer and stop this nonsense." Vivian sighed. "Your silly little lawsuit over the deposit is causing Caroline a tremendous amount of stress. She broke out in hives yesterday, trying to decide between imported orchids and hydrangeas. It is incredibly selfish of you to add financial drama to her plate right now. Preston's family is noticing the tension. Do the right thing and drop the demand letter. We are family. You should want your sister to experience a perfect day." The voicemail ended abruptly. The sheer audacity hung heavily in the air. Vivian stole my money and my venue. Yet she managed to cast Caroline as the ultimate victim because deciding on luxury floral arrangements proved too stressful. She dared to invoke concepts regarding family loyalty after she completely destroyed mine. Aunt Helene chuckled softly from the kitchen doorway. She poured herself a tall glass of iced tea. "Let them fret over those orchids," Helene advised. "They are currently decorating a ship that is already sinking." Helene spoke the absolute truth. Vivian was entirely focused upon the red herring. She obsessed over defending the stolen cash while remaining completely oblivious to the shadow buyout happening right under her expensive shoes. She believed she held all winning cards. She thought her biggest problem involved a minor civil dispute. We let her believe it. The transaction was scheduled to officially close by the end of the month. I continued my daily routine without interruption. I drove to various construction sites. I wore my hard hat alongside my work boots. I kept my head down. However, a new complication arose from a totally unexpected direction. While I waited for the Oakmont deed to officially clear, I received an urgent consultation request from the city zoning board. A wealthy developer had recently purchased a vast tract of coastal marshland just outside city limits. The local historical society strongly suspected the developer was illegally demolishing protected artifacts to fast-track a luxury condominium project. They needed an objective expert to inspect the site and issue an official governmental report. I accepted the job without any hesitation. I drove out to the coastal property early the following morning. The salty breeze whipped across tall marsh grass. Heavy excavation equipment idled near a cluster of ancient oak trees. I approached the site foreman, demanding to review the architectural plans. He handed me his heavy clipboard. I looked down at the corporate letterhead printed clearly at the top of the permits. My blood turned into ice. The development company did not belong to some random stranger. It belonged to Preston's family. The prominent Boston medical professionals were not just operating inside pristine hospitals. They funneled their lucrative surgical income into a highly leveraged property investment portfolio. They sought to maximize their wealth by steamrolling over environmental protection laws. They operated a shadow corporation dedicated to erecting cheap, modern structures over sacred, historic land. The conflict was no longer isolated to a stolen wedding venue. It had just spilled over into a major environmental and historical crime. Vivian thought she was marrying Caroline into flawless, high society royalty. She had no idea her future son-in-law was standing right on the edge of a federal indictment. And I was the inspector holding the pen. I stood on the edge of the marshland with the site foreman's clipboard in my hands. The corporate logo printed at the top of the permits belonged to Preston's family. My mother, Vivian, paraded Preston around Charleston like a prized trophy. She boasted constantly about his surgical pedigree and his elite Boston background. She claimed his family represented the pinnacle of cultural refinement. Yet the permits in my hands revealed a starkly different reality. They operated a predatory real estate venture. They hid behind pristine hospital scrubs while leveling fragile coastal ecosystems for quick profit. I handed the clipboard back to the foreman without a word. I pulled my digital camera from my equipment bag. My job required me to inspect the land and report any historical or ecological disturbances before municipal zoning boards approved further development. I walked past the idling excavators. The air smelled of diesel exhaust mixed with the sharp, salty scent of pluff mud. The ground squelched under my steel-toed boots. I bypassed the main construction trailers and headed toward the eastern tree line where the heavy machinery was currently tearing up the earth. I stopped at the edge of a fresh excavation trench. My chest tightened. Protruding from the dark soil were large chunks of pale gray material. I crouched down and picked up a piece. It was tabby. Tabby is an early building material unique to the coastal South. It is created by burning oyster shells to extract lime and mixing that powder with sand and water. Finding intact 18th century tabby is incredibly rare. It is a vital piece of our architectural history. I brushed the damp dirt from the crushed oyster shells. The structure they were destroying was likely an original colonial foundation. The city zoning board explicitly mandated a full archaeological survey before any digging could commence on this specific parcel. Preston's family skipped that step. They knew a proper survey would delay their luxury condominium project by several months. They chose to obliterate history to protect their profit margins. Their entire social persona rested on honoring Southern heritage, but their business model relied on turning it into rubble. I raised my camera and began documenting the destruction. I photographed the shattered tabby blocks. I recorded the exact GPS coordinates on my tablet. I took wide-angle shots showing the yellow excavators operating directly over the ruins. My hands remained steady. I did not confront the construction crew. Yelling at hourly workers achieves nothing. I gathered my evidence with the clinical detachment of a forensic investigator mapping a crime scene. As I moved further down the trench, I noticed a second violation. This one carried far heavier consequences than the destroyed foundation. The wide metal treads of the bulldozers had churned through a dense patch of tall, vibrant green marsh grass. I knelt in the mud and examined the broken stalks. It was Spartina alterniflora. People outside the Carolina coast might just see weeds, but Spartina alterniflora is an essential sweetgrass that holds the fragile marsh ecosystem together. It filters water and prevents catastrophic coastal erosion. Because of its vital ecological role, it falls under strict federal protection. You cannot simply pave over it. Disturbing even a small section requires extensive federal permitting and rigorous environmental impact studies. Preston's family had driven 10-ton machines straight through a protected federal wetland. The local zoning board could issue fines for the Tabby Foundation, But the Environmental Protection Agency could shut down their entire operation and pursue criminal charges for the sweetgrass. I documented the crushed sweetgrass from multiple angles. I took close-up photos of the bulldozer tracks leading directly into the protected marshland. I collected soil samples and sealed them in clear plastic evidence bags. Every click of my camera shutter added another lock to the cage Preston was building for himself. Vivian treated my profession as an embarrassing quirk. She thought I just dusted off old bricks. She did not comprehend the bureaucratic authority my signature carried. She did not understand that historical preservationists work closely with federal agencies to enforce the law. Preston's family assumed they could outspend any local resistance. They were accustomed to bending rules with their wealth. But environmental statutes do not care about your surgical residency or your Boston pedigree. I finished my inspection and drove back to my carriage house. I sat at my dining table and opened my laptop. I spent the evening drafting a comprehensive report for the city zoning board and a formal complaint to the Environmental Protection Agency. I attached the photographs, the GPS data, and the soil sample analysis. The document I created was a lethal bureaucratic weapon. It was an emergency federal stop work order. Once filed, this order would immediately freeze all construction on the condominium project. It would trigger a mandatory federal investigation. Preston's family would face staggering daily fines. Their private investors would panic and pull their funding. The financial framework supporting their elite lifestyle would collapse within days. I hovered my cursor over the submit button. My pulse thumped in my ears. I could send it right then. I could ruin Preston's family that very night. I pulled my hand away from the mouse. Maya's legal strategy echoed in my mind. Timing is everything in a siege. If I filed the stop work order today, Preston's family would enter crisis mode weeks before the wedding. They might delay the ceremony. They might scale back their expenses. I needed them to commit every last dollar to the Oakmont Estate event. I needed them to stand at the altar of their fake prestige right as the floor fell out beneath them. I saved the document to an encrypted folder on my desktop. I kept the weapon holstered. I would synchronize the environmental strike with the venue cancellation. We would hit them from both sides at the exact same moment. They would have no route of escape. The next few weeks passed with a surreal quiet. Nathan finalized the remaining paperwork for the Oakmont Estate buyout. Maya secured the deed and placed it in a fireproof safe in her downtown office. We legally owned the ground Vivian and Caroline planned to conquer. The trap was constructed and armed. I maintained my distance from my family. I ignored the group text messages filled with breathless wedding updates. I focused on my restoration projects and spent my evenings with Nathan. We cooked dinner together and talked about our own future. We planned a quiet, authentic ceremony that reflected our actual values. We did not need an audience to validate our commitment. I thought my strategic silence would keep Vivian at bay until the trap sprang shut. I underestimated her boundless vanity. Vivian could never just steal a prize. She had to parade it in front of the victim. On a Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Caroline's number. I answered cautiously. Caroline did not say hello or ask how I was doing. She launched immediately into a breathless demand. She wanted to know if my restoration contacts could secure a discount on vintage silver candelabras for the reception tables. She claimed the wedding budget was getting uncomfortably tight. I listened to her complain about the exorbitant cost of luxury floral arrangements. My sister was calling the woman whose savings she stole to ask for a favor to decorate the crime scene. The sheer audacity took my breath away. But as she rattled off the names of her high-end caterers and string quartets, a new opportunity materialized. I realized I needed her to keep talking. I needed to know exactly who she was hiring. 2 weeks after I drafted the environmental stop work order, a glossy publication arrived in mailboxes across the state. Charleston Bridal Magazine is the definitive directory for regional high society. Gracing the cover was a sprawling photograph of my older sister. Caroline wore a pristine white silk gown, standing beneath the iconic sweeping verandas of Oakmont Estate. The headline read, "A Return to Southern Elegance." I purchased a copy from a corner newsstand. I stood on the sidewalk and flipped to the centerfold feature. The sheer delusion printed on those pages was breathtaking. Caroline gave a highly pretentious, exclusive interview detailing her grand vision for the October ceremony. She boasted about our family possessing a deep ancestral connection to the property. She claimed the historic brickwork resonated with her very soul. My sister had never read a single book regarding local architecture. She could not distinguish 18th century lime mortar from cheap modern cement. Yet she spun a magnificent fairy tale for the reporter. She painted herself as the ultimate coastal aristocrat, returning to her rightful heritage. She discussed her bespoke floral arrangements and the imported French lace adorning her veil. She name-dropped Preston and his Boston medical lineage at every possible opportunity. Reading her fabricated narrative provided a deeply satisfying, squirm-inducing tension, because I knew exactly what was happening simultaneously inside a quiet corporate boardroom downtown. At the precise moment those magazines hit the newsstands, Nathan sat across a polished mahogany table from Oakmont's desperate former owners. Maya stood beside him, reviewing the final settlement disclosures. No flash photography documented their meeting. No reporters asked Nathan about his ancestral connections. He simply held a sterling silver pen and signed his name across the bottom of the master deed. Caroline was busy claiming spiritual ownership of the venue in print. Nathan was busy securing actual legal ownership in reality. I needed to attend a preservation board meeting later that afternoon. The municipal committee convened inside a private dining room at the prestigious Palmetto Country Club. It was the same exclusive establishment where Vivian spent her afternoons, networking with wealthy wives and influential dowagers. I wore my tailored navy blazer and carried my leather portfolio. I walked through the grand lobby, admiring the restored heart pine paneling. As I passed the sunlit terrace, I heard a familiar, piercing laugh. I paused near a set of open French doors. Vivian held court at a large circular table surrounded by 8 prominent socialites. Silver-tiered trays holding delicate cucumber sandwiches and petit fours sat untouched amid crystal water goblets. Vivian held a pristine copy of the bridal magazine aloft. She practically beamed with triumphant pride. "Look at the lighting in this shot," Vivian gushed, pointing a manicured finger at the centerfold. The photographer truly captured Caroline's aristocratic profile. Preston's mother ordered 50 copies to distribute among their colleagues back in Massachusetts. Everyone agrees Oakmont is the only acceptable location for a union of this caliber. The surrounding women murmured their polite agreements. They sipped iced tea and offered hollow compliments. Vivian was officially staking her entire social reputation on this single impending event. She tied her public identity to a stolen reservation. She built a glittering monument to her own vanity upon a foundation of wire fraud. I watched her bask in the artificial adoration. I could have walked away. I could have proceeded directly to my committee meeting without engaging. But a crucial part of dismantling a corrupt structure involves observing the load-bearing walls right before you knock them down. I pushed open the French doors and stepped onto the terrace. The coastal breeze caught the hem of my jacket. I walked confidently toward their table. The polite chatter ceased the moment the socialites noticed my approach. Several women shifted uncomfortably in their wrought iron chairs. They knew the rumors. They knew Vivian abruptly transferred the venue. In their polite southern circles, scandalous family gossip was treated like a valuable currency. Vivian lowered the magazine. Her triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into a rigid, polite mask. Caroline sat beside her, looking momentarily panicked. "Felicity, what a surprise," Vivian said. Her tone was sharp and brittle. "I did not realize you held a membership here." "I am attending a municipal zoning board meeting. Inside," I replied. I kept my voice perfectly level and pleasant. "I saw you celebrating and wanted to say hello." I glanced down at the open magazine resting beside the cucumber sandwiches. Caroline's glossy face stared back at me. "A beautiful feature, Caroline," I noted. The photographer certainly utilized favorable angles. Caroline bristled. She reached out and pulled the publication closer to her chest. Preston hired the best media consultant in the city, she sniffed. We wanted to ensure the aesthetic matched the historical significance of the location. Vivian cleared her throat loudly. She sensed the silent judgment radiating from the other women at the table. She needed to reassert her dominance. She needed to prove she controlled the narrative. "Since you are here, Felicity, we should discuss logistics," Vivian announced. She adopted a tone of benevolent maternal grace. She wanted an audience for her performance. She intended to portray the forgiving matriarch offering an olive branch to a difficult child. "I am listening, Vivian," I said. "Your sister and I have discussed the unfortunate tension between us lately," Vivian continued. "We want our family united for the ceremony. Preston agrees that bad blood is terribly uncouth. Therefore, we are willing to extend a formal invitation to you and Nathan. You may attend the Oakmont celebration as guests." She paused dramatically, waiting for the surrounding women to admire her generosity. "However, there is a condition," Vivian added. Her eyes narrowed into cold, calculating slits. "You must drop that ridiculous legal demand letter regarding the deposit. Tell your lawyer to cancel the inquiry. If you cease this petty financial squabble, you can sit in the third row and enjoy the champagne." She was trying to buy her way out of a felony charge with a cheap seat at a stolen wedding. She thought the allure of attending a high society gala would override my desire for justice. She still believed I coveted her shallow world. The socialites held their collective breath. They watched me intently, waiting to see if the estranged daughter would bow to the matriarch's ultimatum. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I offered a slow, cryptic smile. It was the kind of smile you give someone when you hold the only key to their cage. "That is an incredibly generous offer, Vivian," I said. My voice was smooth and unbothered. "I appreciate you trying to accommodate us, but you do not need to worry about my attendance. I assure you, I would not miss Oakmont on October 12th for the world." Vivian beamed. She mistook my guarantee for total surrender. She thought she had won the standoff. She assumed I just traded my $25,000 for a slice of wedding cake. "I am so glad you finally saw reason," Vivian gloated. She picked up her iced tea. "I will have the planner add your names to the secondary guest list." I nodded politely to the ladies at the table. "Enjoy your luncheon," I said. I turned and walked back through the French doors. I left them sitting on the terrace, enveloped in their fragile delusions. As I navigated the country club corridors, my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I retrieved the device and glanced at the screen. It was a single text message from Nathan. "The transaction is finalized. The keys are in my hand." A profound sense of calm washed over my entire body. The irony was exquisite. Vivian sat outside drinking tea and bragging to the Charleston elite about her flawless venue. She had no idea she was trespassing in a conversation about my property. She was planning a party inside a house she did not own. The trap was officially armed. The property deed sat safely locked inside Maya's downtown office. We controlled the ground. But buying the real estate was only the first phase of the siege. We needed to guarantee the cancellation carried strict legal force. I drove straight from the country club to meet Maya. I needed to understand the specific bureaucratic mechanisms we would use to sever Caroline's reservation. When I arrived at the law firm, Maya was already spreading thick operational binders across her conference table. She possessed a dangerous gleam in her eye. She had spent the morning dissecting Oakmont's existing event contracts. She uncovered a fatal administrative flaw buried deep within the venue's transfer of ownership clauses. It was a kill switch, and it meant my sister's wedding was already legally void. I just had to decide the exact day I wanted to push the button. I walked into Maya's downtown law firm. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady rhythm against the oppressive coastal heat outside. Her corner suite overlooked the historic harbor. Sailboats drifted across the dark blue water. Nathan sat on a leather sofa near the floor-to-ceiling windows. He held a crystal tumbler filled with sparkling water. He looked up and offered a warm, reassuring nod. Maya stood at the head of a long walnut conference table. She wore a sharp charcoal suit. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe knot. Stacks of thick black binders covered the polished wood surface. She did not bother with pleasantries or small talk. She possessed a predatory legal mind that preferred immediate action. She slid a thick ivory parchment across the table. I stepped forward and looked down at the document. It was the master deed for Oakmont Estate. The municipal seals were stamped clearly at the bottom. Nathan had utilized a blind limited liability corporation named Heritage Vanguard Investments to shield our identities. The local registry recorded the transaction mere hours ago. We legally controlled the soil, the brick, the ancient oak trees, and every single sweeping veranda. "The estate is ours," Nathan stated. His voice remained smooth and unbothered. The former owners received their wired funds and vacated the primary administrative office this morning. I traced my index finger over the embossed seal. A profound sense of vindication bloomed inside my chest. But acquiring the real estate represented only the initial phase of our strategy. We needed to ensure my family remained entirely ignorant of the transition until the perfect moment. "How do we keep this hidden?" I asked. "Oakmont employs dozens of groundskeepers and event coordinators. Someone will inevitably gossip." Maya opened a blue folder and extracted a signed affidavit. She anticipated that exact vulnerability. "The acquisition agreement includes ironclad non-disclosure clauses," Maya explained. "The previous management team is legally bound by severe financial penalties if they leak the buyout to the press or their current clientele. We instructed the existing hospitality staff to proceed with business as usual. They will continue answering phones under the old corporate moniker. They will conduct property tours and process catering requests. To the outside world, the venue operates normally. It functions as a ghost ship, steered by a phantom crew." The sheer brilliance of the maneuver left me speechless. My mother could call the estate tomorrow and speak to the exact same coordinator who facilitated her fraudulent date transfer. That coordinator would confirm her seating charts and menu selections without ever mentioning that I now signed her paychecks. However, Maya was not finished. She possessed a dangerous gleam in her dark eyes. She picked up a separate red folder containing the municipal hospitality licenses and commercial operation permits. "Securing the deed gives us territorial control," Maya continued. "But I spent the morning dissecting the specific vendor agreements governing pre-existing reservations. When a commercial hospitality property changes corporate entities in South Carolina, the previous event contracts do not automatically transfer in perpetuity." She pulled out a highlighted page and pointed a manicured finger at a dense paragraph of legal jargon. "According to the municipal code, any pending reservation requires explicit written ratification from the new managing guarantor to remain valid," Maya said. "Because the original entity no longer possesses the right to host gatherings, those old contracts are essentially suspended in a state of legal purgatory." I stared at the highlighted text. The implications began to crystallize in my mind. "Are you saying Caroline's reservation is void?" I asked. Maya offered a razor-sharp smile. "I am saying Contract 402 is functionally dead unless you pick up a pen and explicitly authorize it. You are the sole managing director of Heritage Vanguard Investments. Without your countersignature, Caroline holds a worthless piece of paper. Her booking is a phantom." The air left my lungs. I sank into one of the plush conference chairs. I held the ultimate trump card. Vivian utilized forgery and manipulation to steal my dream. She thought she orchestrated a flawless social coup. Instead, she unknowingly locked her favorite daughter inside a financial death trap. The tension inside the room ratcheted up to a dizzying height. Holding this much power carried an immense psychological burden. The true test of my willpower would not involve fighting my family. The ultimate trial required maintaining absolute silence while they marched toward their own destruction. Over the next several days, the reality of my restraint was tested constantly. Vivian ramped up her public performance. She utilized social media to broadcast her extravagant purchases. She posted photographs of imported French lace and rare white orchids. She documented her tasting sessions with elite private chefs. Every single update represented thousands of dollars flowing out of their bank accounts. Caroline was spending hundreds of thousands on non-refundable vendor deposits. She hired a prestigious string quartet from Atlanta. She secured a renowned pastry artisan to design a 6-tier confection. She contracted a luxury lighting firm to illuminate the ancient oak trees. She poured a river of wealth into a venue she did not possess. A small, buried instinct inside my heart urged me to intervene. A lingering echo of my Southern upbringing whispered that a good daughter should prevent her relatives from facing financial ruin. I watched Vivian proudly announce the hiring of a celebrity videographer. I knew that videographer would require a 50% upfront retainer. My finger hovered over the dial pad on my phone. I could call her. I could end the charade and save her from bankruptcy. Then I remembered the trembling of her hands in the parlor. I remembered how easily she erased my fiancé. I remembered her telling me I did not belong in her pristine world. She weaponized our familial bond to elevate her own status. If I warned her now, she would merely pivot. She would cancel the vendors, recover a portion of her funds, and find another historic plantation. She would escape the consequences of her felony wire fraud. She would learn nothing. I placed my phone face down on the table. I chose silence. I chose to let them build their own gallows. The waiting became a psychological endurance sport. I poured my anxious energy into my professional restoration work. I filed the environmental site reports regarding the destroyed sweetgrass on Preston's coastal development. I ensured the federal agencies possessed all the necessary soil samples and photographic evidence to eventually crush his luxury condominium project. I compartmentalized the impending collision. But complacency breeds audacity. Vivian and Caroline grew intoxicated by their perceived invincibility. They interpreted my silence as a total surrender. They believed they had successfully bullied me into submission. Their arrogance swelled until it spilled over the edges of basic common sense. They could not just enjoy their stolen prize. They needed to extract additional value from my defeat. Late on a Thursday afternoon, while I was drafting a lime mortar recipe for a downtown preservation project, my phone vibrated across my desk. The screen displayed Caroline's name. I stared at the incoming call. My sister had not spoken to me directly since the afternoon in the parlor. She communicated exclusively through Vivian's passive-aggressive mandates. For her to reach out personally indicated a shift in their dynamic. I answered the call and pressed the device to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. "Felicity, I need a favor," Caroline stated. Her voice sounded thin and strained. She lacked her usual haughty confidence. I leaned back in my chair. I waited for her to explain. "The wedding budget is getting uncomfortably tight," Caroline confessed. "Preston's parents are being surprisingly stingy about covering the reception aesthetics. I know you work with those dusty antique dealers downtown. I need you to use your little restoration contacts to secure a discount on vintage silver candelabras for the centerpieces. The rental companies are quoting me outrageous prices." The sheer, unadulterated nerve stripped the breath from my throat. She stole my $25,000 deposit. She stole my historic venue. Now she wanted me to leverage my professional relationships to secure cheap table decorations for the crime scene. She was bleeding cash faster than she anticipated. Preston was allegedly a wealthy surgeon from elite Boston royalty. His family should have easily covered floral arrangements and table settings. Yet Caroline was begging her ousted sister for a discount. A new realization clicked into place. The financial foundation beneath Preston's polished medical pedigree was showing severe stress fractures. I needed to know exactly how deep their financial commitments ran. I needed the names of every single company they hired. I smiled into the receiver. I had found the perfect method to gather my intelligence. The coastal rain from the previous week had finally cleared, leaving the Charleston air thick and suffocatingly humid. I kept the mobile device pressed tightly against my ear, listening to the rhythmic breathing on the other end of the line. Caroline waited for my response regarding her request for discounted silver table decorations. A lesser woman might have exploded with righteous anger. A less disciplined sister would have screamed into the receiver, demanding an immediate apology for the stolen reservations. But indignation is a remarkably useless emotion when you are actively constructing a financial guillotine. I recognized her plea for exactly what it represented. It was a massive structural vulnerability. My older sibling was bleeding capital at an alarming rate. I can certainly make a few discreet inquiries, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly smooth and obliging. My preservation colleagues possess extensive catalogs of antique dining accessories. What specific visual theme are you trying to coordinate with your current aesthetic choices? Caroline exhaled a loud breath of relief. She immediately mistook my strategic compliance for pathetic submission. She assumed I was desperate to remain relevant within the orbit of her spectacular high society triumph. We are curating a Gilded Age atmosphere, Caroline explained, her voice regaining its typical haughty altitude. The primary reception space requires towering candelabras to complement the massive floral installations. I hired Magnolia grandiflora botanicals for the centerpieces. They are importing hundreds of rare white orchids directly from South America. The botanical invoice alone is astronomical. I grabbed a legal pad from my desk drawer and uncapped my fountain pen. I wrote down the florist's name, underlining it twice. Imported orchids sound absolutely breathtaking, I encouraged smoothly. You must have selected a premier catering service to match such an opulent display. Obviously, she scoffed lightly. We contracted Coastal Epicurean Masters. They are preparing a bespoke 6-course tasting menu featuring butter-poached lobster and seared duck breast. But their service fees are utterly ridiculous. I tried negotiating a slightly reduced rate for the waitstaff, but their head chef adamantly refused. That is why I need you to secure a bargain on the silver rentals. I transcribed the caterer onto my growing list. I asked her about the auditory entertainment, and she eagerly supplied the title of a prestigious regional symphony quartet. I inquired regarding her custom lighting designers, and she proudly named the most expensive illumination firm operating within the state limits. She treated my probing questions as flattering curiosity. She eagerly surrendered every vital piece of strategic intelligence I required, simply because she adored hearing herself brag. However, a sudden, sour note crept into her boastful monologue. I just wish Preston would stop acting so irritatingly frugal regarding our honeymoon itinerary, Caroline complained bitterly. We originally planned a 3-week excursion through the Amalfi Coast, staying in exclusive 5-star cliffside villas. Now he is pushing for a much shorter trip to a boutique resort in the Bahamas. He claims his investment portfolio is experiencing a temporary liquidity issue due to some unforeseen developmental delays with his newest coastal project. My pen hovered over the legal pad. That single complaint acted as a massive beacon illuminating the hidden truth. Preston was not merely experiencing a minor cash flow problem. The federal environmental stop work order I quietly orchestrated weeks ago was already tearing through his corporate finances. His shadowy luxury condominium development was hemorrhaging capital. His family was scrambling to cover the staggering daily penalties associated with bulldozing protected wetlands. They were draining their personal accounts trying to save their crumbling real estate empire. He is probably just being cautious, I offered, projecting a false platitude to keep her talking. Medical professionals always worry about sudden market fluctuations. Well, his caution is ruining my postnuptial aesthetic, she whined. Just find those vintage candelabras, Felicity. Send me the pricing estimates by Tuesday morning. She terminated the connection without bothering to say goodbye. I stared at the glowing screen for several seconds before looking down at my notepad. I possessed the entire blueprint of her extravagant production. I knew exactly where every single dollar was going. I gathered my keys and drove immediately back to the downtown law firm. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the historic harbor. Maya sat behind her expansive mahogany desk, reviewing municipal tax codes. My Aunt Helene sat on the adjacent leather sofa, reading a thick hardcover biography. Helene had arrived earlier to drop off some family heirloom documents, but stayed to observe the ongoing legal maneuvers. Her sharp intellect and decades navigating Southern societal politics made her an invaluable asset. I placed the yellow paper directly in front of Maya. This is the complete vendor roster I announced. Florist, caterer, lighting, entertainment, and luxury transportation. She just gave me the entire list, voluntarily. Maya leaned forward, resting her chin on her steepled hands. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. She scanned the handwritten names with predatory satisfaction. Helene closed her book and walked over to examine the targets over my shoulder. She is utilizing coastal Epicurean masters, Helene noted, raising an elegant eyebrow. They demand a non-refundable 75% deposit 60 days prior to the event. Their contracts are ruthlessly strict. If the venue cancels, the client loses every single penny. Exactly, Maya agreed, opening a fresh digital document on her computer monitor. Now that we possess the specific corporate names, we can prepare the formal invalidation notices. Maya explained the precise mechanism of our upcoming strike. Because my blind limited liability corporation now legally owned Oakmont Estate, any pre-existing contracts tied to the former management were functionally void without my explicit authorization. However, we could not simply let Caroline show up on her wedding day and lock the iron gates. That might allow her to sue the vendors for failing to deliver promised services. Instead, we needed to inform the specific businesses that their access to the private property was officially revoked. I am drafting cease and desist letters for every single company on this list, Maya declared, her fingers flying across the keyboard. We will notify the florist, the caterer, and the musicians that the Oakmont property has changed ownership. We will explicitly state that Contract 402 is unratified, and any attempt to deliver goods or services to the estate on October 12th will be treated as criminal trespassing. When do we send them? I asked, feeling a sudden rush of adrenaline. Timing is the most critical component of this operation, Maya stated, locking her dark eyes onto mine. If we mail these letters today, Vivian and Caroline will have enough time to panic, secure a backup location, and transfer the vendors. They would survive the catastrophe. We need to maximize the devastation. We wait until 72 hours before the ceremony, Helene interjected, her voice carrying the cold, pragmatic wisdom of a seasoned chess player. Maya nodded in agreement. We will prepare the packets today. They will sit in a secure vault. 3 days before the wedding, when the perishable orchids are already cut, when the lobster is already ordered, and when the final non-refundable balances are permanently cleared from Vivian's bank account, I will dispatch these notices via overnight courier. The vendors will receive the legal ban on Wednesday morning. They will immediately realize they cannot fulfill their contracts because the property owner barred them from the premises. They will keep Vivian's money to cover their own sunk costs, and they will refuse to show up. Caroline will be left standing in an empty field, wearing a worthless white dress. The sheer, comprehensive brutality of the plan left the room in a stunned, respectful silence. I looked at the names, realizing the magnitude of the financial collapse we were orchestrating. Vivian stole my life savings to fund this spectacle. Now she was going to lose exponentially more. Maya printed the official legal warnings and stacked them neatly inside heavy manila envelopes. She locked the pending destruction inside her fireproof filing cabinet. Everything was perfectly aligned. I left the office feeling an intense wave of vindication. The trap was fully constructed, and the trigger was set. I spent the weekend focusing on my preservation projects, deliberately ignoring the frantic updates Vivian posted on her social media channels. I felt entirely in control of the impending collision. But absolute control is often an illusion designed to punish the arrogant. Early Monday morning, my mobile phone chimed with an incoming email notification. I opened the message expecting a routine material delivery confirmation from a local brick supplier. Instead, the sender address belonged to the Municipal Zoning Board. The subject line was flagged with bright red urgency indicators. I read the brief official text, and my blood turned into ice water. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency had processed my anonymous whistleblower report regarding the destroyed sweetgrass on Preston's coastal development site. But they did not simply issue a quiet stop work order as I intended. The magnitude of the ecological damage triggered an immediate, aggressive escalation. The federal authorities had filed a massive injunction and scheduled a highly public emergency tribunal for that very Friday, and they were legally subpoenaing me as the primary expert witness to testify against Preston's corporate entity in open court. My carefully separated parallel tracks of vengeance had just violently crashed into each other. I could no longer remain a silent observer hiding behind a blind corporation. I was about to be dragged directly into the blazing center of the inferno right before the wedding. The thick parchment of the federal subpoena felt remarkably heavy. It represented a massive deviation from my carefully constructed timeline. I sat perfectly still in my home office, staring at the official government seal stamped across the top of the summons. The Environmental Protection Agency demanded my presence at an emergency tribunal that Friday. They needed my expert assessment regarding the obliterated coastal sweetgrass. My anonymous whistleblower report functioned entirely too well. The bureaucratic machinery moved with unprecedented aggression, dragging my identity into the glaring public spotlight days before the planned venue cancellation. I immediately drove back downtown to the legal suite. The coastal morning sun cast long, harsh shadows across the historic harbor. Maya reviewed the official summons with a grim, calculating expression. My Aunt Helene sat rigidly on the leather sofa, tapping her fingers against her knees. We needed to understand why the federal authorities escalated the municipal zoning violation into a high-profile judicial hearing so rapidly. Maya accessed a specialized financial database utilized exclusively by corporate litigators. She began cross-referencing the corporate entity attached to the luxury condominium development. Preston shielded his project behind a labyrinth of shell companies and blind trusts. However, Maya possessed a predatory talent for hunting hidden assets. She peeled back the complex layers of corporate obfuscation one by one. As the financial architecture of the Boston family materialized on the computer monitor, a chilling reality emerged. The digital spreadsheets painted a portrait of total economic devastation. Preston did not come from an elite dynasty of untouched generational prosperity. His grandfather possessed immense capital, but the current generation squandered every single dime. The sprawling Massachusetts estates were mortgaged repeatedly. Their impressive investment portfolios were liquidated a decade ago. The remaining wealth was an elaborate mirage, constructed from predatory commercial loans and high-interest mezzanine debt. The surgeon was effectively broke. I leaned closer to the illuminated screen, tracing the red columns of mounting liabilities. His family leveraged their remaining social prestige to secure massive lines of credit. They funneled millions into speculative coastal real estate ventures, hoping a single successful luxury development would rescue them from total bankruptcy. The waterfront condominium project represented their absolute last desperate gamble. If those protective wetlands remained undisturbed, they might have barely managed to finish construction and repay their ravenous creditors. But my environmental stop work order effectively paused the machinery. With every passing day of delayed excavation, the compounding interest rates devoured their remaining liquidity. They were drowning in a silent, invisible ocean of debt. Helene reviewed a printed summary of their outstanding financial obligations. Her aristocratic features tightened into a mask of pure disgust. This changes the entire dynamic, Helene observed, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Preston is not a wealthy medical professional indulging your mother's social climbing fantasies. He is a desperate predator drowning in insolvency. He needs this extravagant Charleston event to project an illusion of supreme stability. The profound symbiotic parasitism of the impending union finally became perfectly clear. Vivian believed she caught a magnificent aristocratic whale. She thought she was purchasing her own permanent elevation into the absolute highest echelons of Southern elite circles. She happily financed the imported orchids, the bespoke lobster menus, and the towering vintage candelabras, because she viewed them as an investment in a glorious future. But Preston was utilizing my sister as a glossy corporate pitch deck. The entire wedding functioned as an elaborate theatrical production designed specifically to attract a fresh round of private equity investors. He planned to parade his beautiful bride through the sprawling verandas of Oakmont Estate, broadcasting a false narrative of invincible prosperity. He intended to leverage the visual spectacle of my stolen venue to convince wealthy local developers to bail out his failing condominium enterprise. He was using Vivian just as ruthlessly as she used everyone else. The stakes surrounding my impending actions suddenly multiplied exponentially. I was no longer merely disrupting a stolen family celebration or exacting simple revenge for a canceled deposit. I currently possess the precise coordinates to trigger a total nuclear financial explosion. If I testified at the Environmental Tribunal on Friday morning, I would permanently kill the luxury development. The federal injunction would become absolute. His creditors would immediately panic. The banks would call in the massive commercial loans by Friday afternoon. And then on Wednesday morning, Maya would dispatch the property invalidation notices to the caterers and florists. The remaining facade would shatter completely. Preston would stand exposed as a total fraud, just as Vivian realized she surrendered her entire social reputation for an empty, bankrupt shell. I stared out the expansive office windows, watching the sailboats glide across the dark blue water. The sheer magnitude of the impending devastation required absolute psychological fortitude. I needed to stand before a federal judge and deliver the execution order without a hint of hesitation. Maya compiled the damning financial dossiers and placed them inside a secure leather portfolio. We spent the remainder of the afternoon rehearsing my upcoming testimony. I memorized the exact statutory definitions regarding protected coastal flora. I reviewed the GPS coordinates and soil sample analytics until the data became permanently etched into my memory. I returned to my carriage house late that evening, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. I poured a glass of cold water and stood near the kitchen island. The silence of the empty rooms felt heavy with anticipation. The trap was no longer just armed. The fuse was officially lit. Suddenly, a sharp, resolute knock echoed against my solid oak front door. I set my glass down and approached the entryway cautiously. I did not expect any visitors. Nathan was currently managing a property inspection in a neighboring town. I checked the security monitor and froze. A tall, strikingly elegant African-American woman stood on my porch. She wore a perfectly tailored beige trench coat and carried a sleek black leather briefcase. I recognized her immediately from the exhaustive background research Maya conducted earlier that afternoon. It was Jasmine. She was married to Preston's older brother. She served as the chief compliance officer for a massive regional banking institution. She was a brilliant analytical mind trapped within a crumbling family dynasty. I unbolted the lock and slowly pulled the door open. Jasmine did not offer a polite societal greeting. Her dark eyes locked onto mine, projecting intense, calculating urgency. "You need to invite me inside, Felicity," she stated, her voice remarkably calm, but laced with an undeniable undercurrent of tension. "I know exactly what you are planning to do at the federal courthouse this Friday." I stepped back, allowing her to cross the threshold. My pulse began to race. If Jasmine came here to defend her brother-in-law or threaten me into silence, my entire strategy could unravel before dawn. Jasmine walked into the center of my living room and placed her briefcase flat on the coffee table. The polished brass latches clicked sharply in the quiet house. My husband is a fool who blindly follows his father into financial ruin. Jasmine continued turning to face me directly, but I spent the last 5 years building my own career. I refuse to let Preston drag my pristine professional reputation into a federal criminal indictment. She opened the leather case and extracted a thick, bound ledger. "You think you understand the depth of their insolvency," she said, sliding the document toward me. "You found the commercial loan defaults and the leveraged mortgages, but you missed the criminal embezzlement." I stared at the heavy book. A new, terrifying dimension of the conflict yawned open beneath my feet. Preston grew incredibly desperate when the initial construction permits stalled, Jasmine explained, her tone dropping to a clinical, freezing whisper. He needed liquid cash to bribe local zoning officials and cover the early excavation costs. He did not secure another bank loan. he quietly drained the charitable endowment fund attached to his medical residency program. The heir vanished from the room. Stealing from a hospital charity elevated his actions from poor business management to severe federal felonies. If you just testify about the marsh grass, he faces civil fines, Jasmine warned. But if you hand this ledger to the investigating prosecutor on Friday morning, Preston goes to a federal penitentiary. I am giving you the absolute final nail for his coffin. You just have to promise you will swing the hammer hard enough to bury him forever. Exactly 7 days remained until the fictitious matrimonial spectacle. The timeline compressed into a suffocatingly tight window. Vivian decided to host an intimate prenuptial cocktail gathering at her primary residence. She invited 50 prominent community members to admire her superficial triumphs. I arrived at the sprawling brick colonial shortly after sunset. The property stood as a testament to my mother and her relentless pursuit of social validation. She spent 3 decades meticulously curating every square inch of the interior to project an aura of established affluence. She purchased antique oil paintings of complete strangers and boldly claimed them as distant aristocratic ancestors. She arranged imported silk draperies to conceal the fundamental emptiness of her existence. Stepping into the grand foyer triggered a profound physiological response. My pulse accelerated rapidly. A deep, ingrained psychological conditioning flared to life. For 26 years, my designated family role involved acting as the invisible emotional janitor. Whenever Vivian overextended her finances or Caroline alienated a valuable ally, I was expected to quietly repair the damage. The urge to pull my mother aside and whisper the truth screamed inside my mind. I possessed the criminal banking ledger Jasmine provided. I knew Preston was a federal felon standing on the precipice of total devastation. A single sentence from my lips could halt the impending disaster. I could warn them about the canceled venue and the looming environmental tribunal. I felt a gentle hand brush against my lower back. Nathan stood beside me, radiating calm stability. His steady presence anchored my spiraling thoughts. I inhaled a slow, deliberate breath and released the toxic childhood programming. I recalled the absolute clarity of my Aunt Helene and her pragmatic counsel. Let them construct their own gallows, she had instructed. Intervening now would not earn their gratitude. They would simply blame me for ruining their joyous delusion. They needed to experience the full, unmitigated consequences of their arrogance. I straightened my posture and walked into the crowded, formal living room. The atmosphere was thick with expensive perfumes and hollow laughter. Crystal champagne flutes clinked in a continuous rhythmic chorus. Caroline held court near the marble fireplace. She wore a tailored ivory designer dress and gestured wildly while recounting her exhausting floral consultations. Preston stood dutifully by her side. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit that likely cost more than a reliable vehicle. To the untrained observer, he embodied the perfect, prosperous surgeon. But, armed with the devastating financial dossier, I saw right through the polished facade. I noticed the microscopic beads of sweat accumulating along his hairline. I observed the frantic, desperate energy behind his bright smiles. He was a trapped animal, performing for his very survival. Jasmine mingled smoothly among the conservative bankers and local politicians. She wore a stunning emerald green sheath dress that contrasted beautifully with her rich brown complexion. As our eyes met across the room, she offered a microscopic nod of solidarity. She was the sister-in-law trapped in a decaying dynasty, but tonight she played the role of the supportive relative flawlessly. We shared a silent, terrifying bond. We both held the execution orders in our respective pockets. Vivian spotted me lingering near the mahogany wet bar. She excused herself from a circle of wealthy dowagers and glided across the Persian rug. She wore a triumphant, predatory smile. She believed my attendance signaled total defeat. She assumed I had finally accepted my subordinate position within her kingdom. "Felicity, I am so relieved you decided to be sensible," Vivian purred. Her voice was dripping with synthetic honey. She reached out and adjusted the collar of my modest silk blouse. This gesture was designed specifically to make me feel small and inadequate. It is important for our community to see a united front. People were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about your recent absence. "I am simply here to observe the celebration," I replied smoothly. I picked up a delicate china teacup filled with iced herbal brew. I did not want alcohol clouding my judgment. My mother leaned closer. Her expensive floral fragrance was almost intoxicatingly strong. "If you continue to behave appropriately tonight and throughout the ceremony, I might be able to help you," she whispered conspiratorially. "Preston has several colleagues flying down from Boston tomorrow. They are highly successful medical professionals. They come from excellent pedigrees. If you fix your posture and wear something slightly more flattering, I could introduce you. You do not have to settle for a meaningless life with a nobody like Nathan. You could actually make something of yourself." The sheer magnitude of her delusion was physically staggering. She called Nathan a nobody. She pitied my relationship. I looked across the crowded room. Nathan was engaged in a polite conversation with the chief of surgery from the regional hospital. He looked handsome, intelligent, and completely unbothered by the superficial circus surrounding him. He was the secret owner of a multi-million-dollar historic estate. He controlled the exact ground my mother worshipped. He possessed genuine prosperity and unimpeachable character, while the man she idolized was currently embezzling charity funds to avoid a federal indictment. I did not defend my partner. I did not raise my voice. I simply brought the china teacup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold liquid washed away the bitter taste of my mother and her pathetic condescension. "That is a very generous offer," I said softly, "but I am perfectly satisfied with the choices I have made. I assure you, Nathan provides exactly what I need." Vivian sighed heavily. She rolled her eyes, projecting the long-suffering patience of a martyr. "Suit yourself," she muttered, "but do not come crying to me when you wake up in a decade realizing you wasted your potential on a working-class contractor." She turned and walked back toward her adoring audience. I remained near the bar, watching the performance continue. The party raged for another 2 hours. Elaborate hors d'oeuvres circulated on silver platters, while a jazz trio played softly in the corner. As the evening concluded, the guests began migrating toward the foyer to collect their coats. I followed the crowd, intending to slip out quietly into the humid night. However, as I passed the private study, I heard a hushed, frantic conversation. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I paused perfectly still in the shadowed hallway. Preston was speaking. His voice lacked any trace of his usual smooth arrogance. It was jagged with genuine panic. "The wire transfer did not clear." "Vivian," he hissed, "the exclusive caterer is threatening to breach the contract if the final 75% is not deposited by tomorrow morning. My portfolio manager is completely unreachable, and my personal assets are temporarily frozen due to a ridiculous banking error. We are going to lose the reception." "Do not raise your voice in my house," Vivian snapped back. Her tone was equally desperate. "I told you I would handle any temporary liquidity issues. The home equity loan was approved yesterday afternoon. The bank gave me a cashier check for $300,000 against this property. I will endorse it over to you right now. You take it to the culinary team first thing tomorrow. Nobody is canceling this wedding." I pressed my hand against the cold plaster wall. The floor seemed to drop away entirely. My mother had not simply spent her available savings. She had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on her own primary residence. She handed the absolute total sum of her financial security directly to a federal criminal. When the vendor cancellation notices arrived on Wednesday and the environmental tribunal destroyed Preston on Friday, he would already possess all of her money. And because he owed millions to aggressive creditors, that cashier check would vanish instantly into his cavernous debt. Vivian was not just going to face social humiliation. She was going to lose her beloved home. The impending explosion had just claimed its final, absolute casualty. Felicity stood beneath the soaring, vaulted ceilings of the downtown Federal Administrative Building. The ambient noise of the bustling government lobby echoed around her. She clutched a heavy, sealed envelope containing the absolute destruction of a fraudulent empire. Exactly 3 days remained until the fictitious high society matrimonial spectacle. The suffocating pressure of the previous weeks crystallized into a singular, razor-sharp focus. She approached the central administrative desk to formally file the comprehensive environmental injunction. Her extensive professional background in structural and ecological preservation provided the perfect camouflage for her devastating investigation. She had dedicated her entire adult life to protecting the fragile history and delicate ecosystems of the southern coastline. She spent countless hours analyzing soil compositions and cataloging indigenous flora. Preston arrogantly assumed her career was merely a quaint hobby, unsuitable for elite dinner conversations. He fundamentally misunderstood the lethal precision required to secure municipal conservation mandates. His luxury waterfront condominium project ruthlessly bulldozed acres of protected Spartina alterniflora grass. This specific coastal vegetation served as the critical biological anchor for the surrounding wetland habitat. Eradicating it without explicit federal authorization constituted a massive ecological crime. Felicity submitted the meticulously documented soil samples, the stamped geospatial coordinates, and the terrifying criminal ledger procured by Jasmine. The intake clerk stamped the thick stack of documents with a heavy red bureaucratic seal. The machinery of justice engaged instantly. A specialized division of the Environmental Protection Agency authorized an immediate and absolute cessation of all commercial development on the Boston family's construction site. The Historical Zoning Board issued a parallel mandate, freezing their remaining municipal permits. The federal authorities prepared to publicly serve the disastrous stop work orders before sunset. The first fuse was officially burning. The spark traveled rapidly along the invisible wire. While Felicity navigated the sterile government corridors, Maya orchestrated the secondary tactical strike from her corner suite overlooking the historic harbor. The formidable corporate attorney operated with cold, surgical efficiency. Her expansive mahogany desk was completely buried beneath dozens of thick overnight courier packets. Each pristine envelope contained a legally binding notification of absolute doom. Maya coordinated a synchronized deployment. She summoned a fleet of expedited delivery professionals to distribute the radioactive missives to every single luxury business associated with the impending ceremony. The specialized documents explicitly informed the premier florists, the elite string quartets, and the pretentious culinary masters that Oakmont Estate possessed a new corporate ownership structure. Heritage Vanguard Investments assumed total territorial control. The previous venue management contracts were permanently nullified. Any attempt to deliver imported white orchids or butter-poached lobster to the private grounds would trigger an immediate aggressive law enforcement response for criminal trespassing. Maya ensured the delivery timeline maximized the financial devastation. The bespoke vendors had already purchased their perishable supplies. They permanently absorbed Vivian and her massive, non-refundable cash deposits. The trap accelerated toward its inevitable collision. The momentum shifted entirely out of human control. Felicity walked out of the courthouse and felt the oppressive coastal humidity wash over her face. A profound sense of liberation replaced the lingering familial anxiety. She returned to her modest carriage house and systematically severed all digital connections to her previous life. She powered down her primary mobile telephone. She disabled her personal electronic mail accounts. She knew her mother would soon discover the catastrophic vendor cancellations. Vivian would undoubtedly unleash a hysterical barrage of demanding messages and frantic voicemails when her synthetic kingdom began collapsing. Felicity refused to grant her toxic relatives an audience for their spectacular downfall. She packed a supple leather duffel bag with a carefully curated selection of elegant garments. Nathan waited near the kitchen island holding his own sophisticated luggage. His calm, steadfast presence acted as an impenetrable fortress against the incoming storm. He possessed genuine generational wealth, but chose to build a successful architectural restoration enterprise with his own rough hands. He never required validation from shallow aristocrats or country club matrons. His silent strength offered a beautiful contrast to the loud, desperate posturing of the fraudulent surgeon. Nathan offered a warm, reassuring smile. He understood the immense psychological fortitude required to execute this righteous retribution against her own bloodline. They stepped out of the carriage house and locked the door, leaving the ghosts of her subordinate childhood behind forever. They drove through the winding coastal roads until the massive wrought iron gates of Oakmont Estate appeared through the dense canopy of ancient Spanish moss. The heavy metal barriers parted smoothly, acknowledging their true sovereign masters. Nathan bypassed the bustling administrative buildings and navigated his reliable vehicle toward the secluded residential quadrant of the sprawling property. The historic owner's suite sat entirely concealed beneath a grove of towering, century-old oak trees. This private sanctuary remained strictly separated from the public event lawns and commercial reception halls. The interior of the suite radiated timeless Southern opulence. Hand-carved mahogany furniture rested upon authentic, antique Persian rugs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking, unobstructed views of the dark, winding river. Felicity unpacked her clothing and placed her garments inside the massive cedar wardrobes. She claimed the exact prestigious territory her mother desperately sacrificed everything to infiltrate. The dramatic irony tasted incredibly sweet. She finally inhabited the pinnacle of local high society on her own uncompromising terms. They spent the fading afternoon hours relaxing inside the luxurious domain. Nathan poured 2 crystal glasses of sparkling mineral water. They monitored the perimeter security cameras through a specialized digital console mounted on the library wall. The isolation felt intoxicating. The sprawling plantation was completely silent. The manicured lawns remained perfectly empty, waiting for a spectacular celebration that would never occur. However, the tranquil atmosphere shattered much earlier than anticipated. The carefully constructed timeline suddenly ruptured. As the sun dipped below the coastal horizon, the encrypted internal communication system chimed with alarming urgency. The senior property manager spoke through the secure intercom module. His normally composed voice trembled with genuine panic. A massive, volatile situation was rapidly escalating at the primary entrance gates. The specialized courier service delivered the legal cancellation notices to the commercial vendors much faster than Maya calculated. Felicity rushed to the security monitors and stared at the high-definition video feeds. Her breath hitched in her throat. A chaotic fleet of commercial delivery vehicles entirely blocked the main access highway. The furious executive chef from Coastal Epicurean Masters stood near the iron perimeter screaming at the bewildered security guards. He waved the legal cease and desist letter demanding immediate access to the venue kitchens. The botanical designers arrived simultaneously with 3 refrigerated trucks packed full of dying imported orchids. They realized their massive contracts were completely worthless. They wanted an immediate physical confrontation. But the vendors were not the most terrifying element of the mounting crisis. Caroline was there. She stood in the center of the furious mob wearing a frantic, disheveled designer gown. Her perfect, polished facade was completely obliterated. She gripped her own mobile device, weeping hysterically and pounding her delicate fists against the unforgiving metal bars of the estate gate. The crisis detonated prematurely, and the security cameras captured a highly recognizable local news broadcasting van pulling onto the grassy shoulder of the highway. Their massive television lenses aimed directly at the weeping bride and the chaotic riot of bankrupt vendors. The Federal Environmental Tribunal was supposed to strike first, but the social humiliation arrived early, bringing an audience of thousands. Felicity realized they were trapped inside the luxurious suite while a catastrophic media circus erupted directly upon their doorstep. The chaotic assembly at the main iron perimeter dissolved with astonishing speed. Maya had anticipated a potential premature detonation regarding the expedited delivery schedules. The brilliant corporate attorney deployed a specialized crisis management firm directly to the coastal highway. These aggressive legal fixers intercepted the furious culinary directors and confused botanical suppliers before any local television reporters could broadcast the impending disaster. The fixers fabricated a highly plausible narrative regarding a temporary municipal zoning audit, securing a fragile 24-hour truce. Caroline wiped away her hysterical tears, entirely believing the blatant lie that her prestigious suppliers merely lacked the proper commercial parking permits. Vivian remained completely oblivious to the catastrophic legal doom hovering directly above her meticulously styled hair. The arrogant matriarch simply commanded the hired security staff to open the gates and proceed with the Friday evening festivities. The sprawling, manicured lawns of Oakmont Estate transformed into an extravagant playground, specifically designed for the Boston family. Towering, pristine canvas tents glowed with warm amber illumination against the darkening coastal sky. A magnificent string symphony began playing classical arrangements, while impeccably dressed waiters circulated, carrying silver trays adorned with imported beluga caviar. The sheer opulent scale of the rehearsal dinner rivaled most royal banquets. Every single detail screamed of limitless wealth and absolute societal dominance. Vivian originally grew up in a remarkably modest duplex located on the unfashionable perimeter of the city limits. Her desperate, insatiable hunger for aristocratic validation stemmed from decades spent watching wealthy debutantes mock her cheap, homemade clothing. She dedicated every waking moment of her adult life to erasing her working-class origins. Her entire psychological identity relied heavily upon projecting unyielding affluence to her judgmental peers. She never learned to cultivate genuine relationships because she viewed every human interaction as a strategic transaction designed to elevate her public standing. Felicity stood completely motionless on the expansive second-floor veranda of the private owner's suite. The heavy mahogany doors remained safely locked behind her, ensuring total isolation from the festivities below. She gripped the cold, wrought-iron balcony railing, gazing down at the spectacular illusion unfolding across her property. Her gorgeous emerald silk dress rippled gently in the warm ocean breeze. She possessed the absolute authority to terminate the symphony and banish every single trespasser into the humid night. Yet, she maintained an unbreakable, silent composure. Nathan stood quietly beside her, serving as a steadfast pillar of calm support. He grew up mastering the intricate, demanding art of historical architectural restoration. He learned his specialized trade directly from his grandfather, who meticulously rebuilt shattered coastal mansions after devastating hurricanes. Nathan understood the profound difference between creating genuine, lasting value and merely purchasing superficial status symbols. He never required validation from shallow country club elites because his immense wealth was firmly rooted in tangible, honest labor. His quiet confidence offered a perfect stabilizing counterweight to the toxic, swirling drama surrounding the estate. Down on the glowing, pristine grass, Preston mingled flawlessly with prominent local politicians and wealthy regional developers. The groom wore a perfectly tailored linen suit, projecting the exact image of a relaxed, prosperous medical professional. He clinked his crystal glass with powerful banking executives, flashing a bright, charismatic smile. None of those affluent investors realized they were conversing with a desperate, cornered predator. They had no idea that federal investigators were currently dismantling his fraudulent condominium project across town. Preston utilized this extravagant rehearsal dinner as a vital marketing tool, attempting to secure emergency capital before his entire financial house of cards collapsed. The climax of the evening arrived when Vivian demanded absolute attention from the wealthy gathered attendees. She stepped onto a small, elevated wooden platform, holding a fresh flute of expensive vintage champagne. Her amplified voice echoed clearly across the historic grounds, reaching the shadowed balcony where Felicity watched. Vivian delivered a sickeningly sweet monologue regarding generational legacy and the profound, critical importance of monumental land ownership. She proudly welcomed the Boston family to their magnificent new Southern headquarters. The sheer magnitude of the dramatic irony was almost physically intoxicating. The completely oblivious mother proudly bragged about possessing the exact, precise soil that legally belonged to the specific daughter she had relentlessly tormented and discarded. Vivian essentially crowned herself the undisputed queen of a kingdom she did not own. The intense, burning urge to shatter the mirage flared fiercely within Felicity. She could easily walk down the grand curved staircase, present the official notarized property deed, and completely humiliate her cruel mother in front of 50 elite witnesses. However, the brilliant preservationist swallowed the temptation. Destroying the rehearsal dinner would only offer a brief, fleeting burst of satisfaction. Permitting Vivian and Caroline to consume this final, exquisite night of supreme delusion guaranteed their ultimate psychological devastation upon sunrise. Felicity breathed deeply, anchoring her racing thoughts to the pragmatic advice of her wise aunt. She let the arrogant women construct their own spectacular gallows. Across the illuminated lawn, Jasmine caught sight of Felicity standing in the shadows of the second-floor veranda. The elegant sister-in-law offered a microscopic, respectful nod of absolute solidarity. Jasmine knew the devastating criminal banking ledgers were already safely resting inside the federal prosecutor office. She understood that this glorious party was merely the final, beautiful breath of a dying criminal empire. The two women shared a silent, terrifying understanding across the vast expanse of manicured grass. As midnight approached, the lavish gathering gradually began to disperse. The elite guests summoned their private luxury vehicles and retreated to their respective downtown penthouse accommodations. Vivian and Caroline returned to the primary guest house, exhausted but radiating absolute victorious triumph. Only Preston remained lingering alone near the deserted canvas tents. The charming medical facade instantly melted away, leaving a frantic, terrified expression. Felicity watched the desperate groom pull a sleek mobile device from his jacket pocket. The bright digital screen illuminated his pale, sweating face. He paced aggressively across the lawn, reading a highly urgent text message. The federal environmental injunction had just officially triggered a catastrophic financial chain reaction. His primary offshore lenders instituted an immediate, total emergency freeze on every single active credit line. He could not access a solitary dollar to pay the furious vendors waiting eagerly for morning. Preston frantically dialed his crisis management attorney, demanding immediate answers. His hushed, panicked voice drifted faintly upward toward the balcony. He learned the exact corporate name responsible for halting his massive luxury development. Heritage Vanguard Investments filed the lethal whistleblower report. He also discovered that this exact same shadowy corporation currently held the master legal deed to Oakmont Estate. The geographical overlap was entirely too specific to be a coincidence. The desperate surgeon ended the call and stared blankly at the historic manor. He mentally connected the invisible scattered dots. He remembered Vivian mentioning that Felicity utilized her obscure restoration contacts to manage the venue logistics. He realized he was not fighting a faceless municipal bureaucracy. He was fighting the quiet, dismissed sister. Preston slowly lifted his head and scanned the dark, imposing architecture of the primary residence. His frantic, searching eyes locked directly onto the second-floor veranda. He saw Felicity staring back at him, illuminated briefly by the distant security floodlights. The invisible Cold War was officially over. He knew exactly who was holding the match, and the true, explosive panic finally began. Saturday morning broke across the Carolina coastline with an oppressive, suffocating heat. The brilliant golden sun climbed steadily above the dark Atlantic waters, illuminating the sprawling historic grounds of Oakmont Estate. Felicity stood perfectly still near the expansive bay windows of the master suite, pouring a steaming cup of dark-roasted coffee. She adjusted her emerald silk dressing gown and gazed down at the primary entrance avenue. The ultimate climax of her meticulously engineered retribution had officially arrived. Her pulse maintained a steady, rhythmic cadence. She felt no hesitation or lingering guilt. The preservationist merely possessed a cold, clinical anticipation. The timeline finally caught up to the chaotic destination she envisioned months ago when the initial betrayal occurred. Beside her, Nathan rested a reassuring hand against the small of her back. His quiet, solid presence anchored her to reality, ensuring the impending storm would not sweep her away. Down at the outer perimeter, massive steel chains secured the towering wrought iron gates. Heavy brass padlocks gleamed fiercely in the harsh morning light. 6 muscular private security contractors patrolled the boundary line. They wore tactical dark uniforms and carried thick clipboards containing strict authorization rosters. These men were absolute professionals, hired specifically by Maya to withstand extreme verbal abuse and emotional manipulation. At precisely 8 o'clock, the anticipated invasion commenced. A sprawling, chaotic fleet of commercial delivery vans slowly materialized along the winding coastal highway, creating a massive traffic bottleneck. The premium botanical designers arrived first, piloting 3 large refrigerated trucks packed tightly with delicate imported white orchids. The aggressive executive chef from coastal Epicurean masters pulled up seconds later, slamming his vehicle door with visible, undisguised fury. They expected immediate, unrestricted access to the catering kitchens and floral staging areas. Instead, the stern guards handed them legally binding trespass warnings. The furious culinary director began shouting, his face transforming into a brilliant shade of crimson. He aggressively waived his useless catering contract, demanding to speak with the property manager. The florists realized their massive investments were currently trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory. They started unloading the expensive blooms onto the hot, dusty asphalt, attempting to save the fragile petals from the baking metal truck beds. Miles away from the escalating rural blockade, total chaos erupted inside an opulent downtown brick colonial. Vivian orchestrated a whirlwind of frenzied cosmetic preparations within her immaculate residence. Professional makeup artists and expensive hairstylists buzzed around the grand foyer, wielding curling irons and setting sprays. Caroline sat regally in a plush velvet chair, sipping a chilled peach mimosa and admiring her perfectly manicured nails. The radiant bride eagerly anticipated a glorious day of unrivaled aristocratic triumph. She firmly believed this spectacular matrimonial event would permanently cement her status among the absolute highest echelons of Southern society. A heavy brass knocker suddenly pounded against the thick mahogany front door, disrupting the joyful symphony of preparation. A uniformed legal courier stood rigidly on the marble porch, holding a stack of thick, sealed manila envelopes. Vivian signed the digital electronic receipt with arrogant impatience. She foolishly assumed the packages contained luxurious last-minute gifts from wealthy, out-of-town admirers. The matriarch practically tore open the foremost parcel, utilizing a sharp silver letter opener. She expected to find engraved crystal or vintage jewelry. The devastating document spilled violently onto the pristine Persian rug. Vivian stared blankly at the heavy black text. The official legal notification explicitly declared Oakmont Estate under entirely new corporate jurisdiction. Heritage Vanguard Investments formally voided all previous event contracts effective immediately. The second document outlined a comprehensive, terrifying fraud dossier, detailing the unauthorized appropriation of the $25,000 initial venue deposit. The ruthless paperwork explicitly named Vivian as a primary co-conspirator in deliberate wire fraud, threatening severe criminal prosecution if she ever stepped foot on the plantation soil. Before the stunned mother could verbally comprehend the sheer magnitude of this legal devastation, a deafening chorus of electronic ringtones erupted throughout the lavish house. Caroline answered her glowing mobile device with a joyful greeting that instantly died in her throat. The shrill, panicked voice of her elite wedding coordinator echoed loudly through the external speaker. The frightened planners screamed that armed tactical guards completely blocked the venue entrance. The expensive floral arrangements were currently wilting on the hot coastal highway. The bespoke imported champagne sat baking inside stranded delivery vehicles, while local law enforcement threatened to issue traffic citations. Vivian violently snatched the telephone away from her weeping daughter. Her deeply ingrained psychological conditioning absolutely refused to accept this catastrophic reality. Decades spent ruthlessly cultivating a flawless societal facade completely shattered her logical reasoning capabilities. She loudly declared the entire terrifying situation a malicious amateur prank. She immediately blamed a jealous rival country club president, suggesting this unseen woman was desperately attempting to sabotage their triumphant familial ascension. The matriarch convinced herself that showing up and demanding entry would instantly dispel the ridiculous illusion. She believed her sheer force of will could conquer federal property mandates. Driven by pure, frantic delusion, Vivian ordered the entire bridal party into their luxury vehicles. They did not even pause to don their expensive, tailored designer gowns. Caroline sprinted out the front door wearing only her white silk morning robe and fuzzy pink slippers, weeping uncontrollably and smudging her elaborate professional makeup. 6 bewildered bridesmaids followed closely behind, clutching half-empty crystal champagne flutes and adjusting their hair rollers. The terrified women jumped into a fleet of gleaming black sport utility vehicles, leaving the confused cosmetic team abandoned in the foyer. The desperate convoy sped dangerously down the coastal highway, resembling a panicked, fleeing cavalry unit. Vivian gripped the leather steering wheel, her knuckles turning completely white from the intense pressure. She mentally drafted a vicious speech intended to verbally destroy whichever low-level security guard dared interrupt her crowning achievement. She promised Caroline that the gates would swing wide open the moment the property owners recognized their supreme social importance. They raced blindly toward the rural plantation, completely unaware they were accelerating straight into the merciless jaws of a meticulously designed trap. Back at the historic manor, Felicity watched the digital security monitors with detached fascination. The situation at the perimeter was about to evolve into an unprecedented public spectacle. As the manic bridal convoy approached the final highway intersection, they did not merely find locked iron gates and angry displaced caterers. They discovered a terrifying secondary blockade consisting of multiple dark-armored federal vehicles equipped with flashing brilliant blue strobe lights, blocking the entire right lane. Preston had spent the previous evening desperately attempting to secure emergency capital from obscure overseas lenders to cover his imploding luxury condominium debts. That reckless midnight electronic transaction triggered an automatic international money laundering alert within the federal banking system. The Financial Crimes Division arrived at dawn to officially seize the groom's remaining physical assets. This massive government confiscation explicitly included the rented luxury automotive fleet currently transporting the bridal party. Vivian slammed on her brakes, skidding wildly onto the grassy shoulder as stern federal marshals stepped onto the pavement with raised hands. The matriarch rolled down her window, preparing to scream her righteous indignation. Instead, she found herself staring directly into the cold, unforgiving eyes of Jasmine. The brilliant African-American compliance officer stood calmly alongside the government agents, holding a pristine clipboard. Jasmine leaned gracefully toward the luxury vehicle, wearing a sharp, tailored business suit. She smiled with lethal professional courtesy and informed the screaming mother that the vehicle she currently occupied was officially property of the United States Justice Department. The ultimate public humiliation had firmly rooted itself in the southern dirt, and the audience of stranded vendors eagerly pulled out their mobile cameras to broadcast the spectacular ruin. The oppressive coastal humidity clung tenaciously to the distressed mother as she marched furiously along the asphalt highway shoulder. Stripped of her confiscated luxury transport, Vivian dragged her silk morning robe through the dusty roadside gravel. Caroline trudged reluctantly behind, weeping softly into a ruined lace handkerchief. Her pink fuzzy slippers offered zero protection against the sharp, loose stones littering the uneven pathway. The bewildered bridesmaids trailed this pathetic procession, clutching their useless crystal champagne flutes. They resembled frightened refugees fleeing a collapsed, superficial empire rather than elite members of an aristocratic bridal party. A dozen stranded caterers and angry botanical designers watched this bizarre parade approach the locked wrought iron perimeter. Humiliation radiated from every single desperate step, yet the delusional woman maintained her rigid, aggressive posture. She stubbornly clung to the fading belief that sheer maternal authority could somehow obliterate federal property laws. Standing serenely on the opposite side of those heavy metal bars, Felicity presented a breathtaking contrast to the chaotic mob outside. She wore an impeccable tailored ivory pantsuit, projecting total calm control. Her dark hair fell perfectly across her shoulders, framing a face completely devoid of any lingering familial anxiety. For 26 long years, she endured the toxic, dismissive shadow cast by her older sibling. During childhood, Vivian routinely canceled her younger daughter's modest piano recitals just to accommodate extravagant dress fittings for the golden child. That painful history forged a steely, resilient core within the overlooked sister. Now possessing the master legal deed to Oakmont Estate, Felicity transformed into the undisputed sovereign of this contested territory. Nathan stood quietly nearby, offering silent, unwavering support. His rugged, honest background provided a brilliant counterweight to the fraudulent superficiality waiting beyond the gates. Jasmine watched the unfolding spectacle from a strategic vantage point near the law enforcement blockade. The brilliant African-American compliance officer felt a profound sense of righteous satisfaction. She had married into a decaying dynasty overflowing with deceitful predators. Providing the criminal banking ledgers to her capable sister-in-law was the smartest tactical decision of her entire professional career. Jasmine observed the arrogant women marching blindly toward their ultimate destruction. She admired Felicity for orchestrating this flawless, surgical strike against a deeply corrupted family unit. The inevitable reckoning arrived right on schedule. Vivian reached the padlocked boundary and wrapped her perfectly manicured fingers around the dark, cold steel. Her face contorted into a mask of ugly, unfiltered rage. She commanded her younger offspring to immediately cease this embarrassing tantrum and unlock the entrance. The haughty socialite barked unreasonable orders, utilizing that familiar, piercing tone designed specifically to induce deep guilt and total compliance. She boldly declared the surrounding stranded vendors were merely witnessing a temporary, pathetic misunderstanding orchestrated by a jealous, ungrateful child. Caroline whimpered loudly, begging her sibling to stop ruining the most important day of her entire existence. The devastated bride completely ignored the glaring reality of her own smudged makeup and inappropriate attire, choosing instead to project all blame outward. Felicity did not raise her voice, nor did she flinch under the vicious verbal assault. She stepped forward with graceful, deliberate precision. Retrieving a crisp, folded document from her jacket pocket, she slid the important paperwork smoothly between the narrow, metallic gaps. The paper fluttered briefly before landing squarely against the dusty pavement directly over the boundary line. That single printed sheet represented the devastating culmination of weeks spent enduring relentless, cruel deception. Vivian snatched the paper off the ground, her eyes darting frantically across the complex legal terminology. The bold, notarized signatures confirmed the brutal, undeniable truth. Heritage Vanguard Investments belonged entirely to the woman standing proudly inside the sanctuary. Speaking with a low, perfectly modulated cadence, Felicity delivered the fatal linguistic blow. She detailed the precise timeline of their treacherous digital theft. Her clear, steady voice resonated across the silent, tense crowd, ensuring every stranded elite attendee and confused bridesmaid heard the damning evidence. She explained exactly how her proprietary cloud storage account was illegally breached during a chaotic family dinner. She described the stolen architectural blueprints and the malicious redirection of her initial $25,000 reservation deposit. The brilliant preservationist systematically dismantled the false narrative Vivian meticulously constructed over the past several months. She exposed the forged venue contracts and the deliberate financial manipulation designed to steal her rightful property. The impact of this public revelation was instantaneous and catastrophic. High society operates upon an incredibly fragile foundation of perceived respectability and shared grand illusions. Hearing a meticulous, factual account of felony wire fraud instantly shattered the Boston family prestige forever. The wealthy guests who had eagerly followed the bridal convoy now exchanged horrified, panicked glances. Nobody wanted their prestigious reputations permanently linked to a blatant criminal enterprise currently under active federal investigation. The elite crowd began physically stepping backward, retreating swiftly from the toxic epicenter. One prominent bridesmaid, a wealthy banking heiress, immediately pulled out her mobile telephone. She dialed her powerful father, demanding he swiftly sever all corporate business ties with the disgraced older woman. Other influential figures turned their backs completely, pretending they never even knew the fraudulent relatives. They desperately sought to distance themselves from a decaying household caught committing severe federal crimes. The social isolation was immediate, brutal, and absolutely permanent. Sensing her complete societal power evaporating into the warm morning breeze, Vivian attempted a desperate, pathetic pivot. She softened her piercing shriek into a cloying, manipulative whisper. She invoked the sacred historical bonds of Southern kinship, pleading with Felicity to protect their shared family heritage. She begged her successful offspring to remember the countless sacrifices made during their shared childhood history. But this hollow, sentimental appeal completely failed against the impenetrable fortress of a certified legal decree. Felicity merely offered a cold, detached stare, entirely immune to the synthetic maternal guilt trip. The invisible psychological chains of her youth were permanently broken. The towering ancient oak trees surrounding the estate stood as silent, majestic witnesses to this unprecedented downfall. Their long, sweeping branches, draped in thick Spanish moss, cast long, ominous shadows across the immaculate, manicured lawns. The historic plantation had survived devastating hurricanes and brutal historical conflicts. It easily repelled this pathetic modern invasion of fraudulent social climbers. Nathan rested his strong, calloused hand gently upon Felicity's shoulder. He felt immense pride witnessing her remarkable transformation from a suppressed daughter into a formidable, unyielding force of nature. He knew the massive restoration project awaiting them inside the manor would pale in comparison to the monumental psychological rebuilding she just successfully completed. The intense summer sun beat down mercilessly upon the exposed asphalt, baking the ruined floral arrangements and intensifying the suffocating atmosphere of despair. Caroline continued to weep openly, her glamorous facade melting away beneath the relentless heat and the crushing reality of her shattered existence. The once proud golden child now resembled a broken porcelain doll discarded carelessly onto the dirty roadside. Her entire identity relied exclusively upon the validation of wealthy strangers and the false promises of a criminal surgeon. Deprived of those superficial pillars, she collapsed into a pathetic puddle of complete nothingness. The crushing weight of total, irreversible defeat finally broke the younger sister. Her grand, opulent society wedding evaporated completely, leaving only agonizing public disgrace and immense financial ruin. The broken bride did not seek comfort or beg for mercy from the surrounding crowd. She simply let her exhausted knees buckle entirely. She sank heavily onto the harsh, unforgiving pavement, sobbing uncontrollably into her trembling hands. Her beautiful white robe absorbed the dark, dirty grease stains left behind by the departed catering trucks. She became a literal, visual representation of a collapsed, corrupted dynasty. Her majestic dreams turned into mere asphalt dust. Just as the profound silence of final victory settled over the historic plantation, a new, terrifying sound shattered the rural tranquility. The piercing wail of approaching sirens echoed loudly from the winding coastal highway. A heavy convoy of marked local police cruisers accelerated rapidly toward the chaotic gathering at the perimeter gates. However, these flashing vehicles were not responding to the stranded vendors or the confiscated luxury cars. They bypassed the federal agents entirely and screeched to a sudden halt directly behind the weeping bride. 4 uniformed officers exited their vehicles with grim, determined expressions, holding thick stacks of official arrest warrants. The shocking realization hit the remaining crowd simultaneously. The disastrous consequences of Preston and his massive charity embezzlement had just violently collided with Vivian and her desperate illegal home equity loan. The investigators traced the fraudulent construction cash directly back to the forged property deposit. The mother was no longer merely a humiliated social pariah facing staggering debt. She was now a primary criminal target in a sprawling financial conspiracy. The officers stepped forward, brandishing heavy metal handcuffs, signaling a brand new, devastating chapter of legal nightmare. The flashing blue police lights painted the surrounding ancient trees with rhythmic, terrifying illumination. Before the uniformed municipal officers could firmly secure the heavy steel cuffs around the shrieking, desperate matriarch, a massive black luxury sport utility vehicle swerved violently off the main asphalt road. The heavy, deep-treaded tires shredded the manicured roadside grass, sending thick clumps of dark, wet mud flying into the humid morning air. The wildly expensive automobile slammed into a sudden, aggressive halt, mere inches away from the parked federal transport vans. The driver's side door flew open with an explosive, metallic crack. Preston stumbled onto the cracked, uneven pavement. He did not wear his custom-tailored Italian wedding tuxedo. The disgraced elite surgeon wore rumpled beige golf trousers and a dark, sweat-stained designer polo shirt. His normally perfectly coiffed blonde hair plastered wildly against his damp, flushed forehead. Dark, exhausted purple circles framed his bloodshot, frantic eyes. He completely bypassed the cluster of local law enforcement personnel. He entirely ignored his weeping, devastated fiancée kneeling pathetically on the dirty roadside ground. The ambitious doctor possessed a notoriously ruthless reputation within elite global medical circles. He grew up surrounded by aggressive corporate litigators and predatory hedge fund managers inside wealthy northeastern estates. He learned early during his privileged childhood that human compassion was merely a pathetic weakness routinely exploited by smarter, agile competitors. His entire adult existence centered around acquiring maximum financial power and absolute social control over every conceivable situation. Today, that tyrannical iron grip finally shattered into a million irreparable, microscopic pieces. The frantic groom sprinted directly toward the locked wrought iron boundary. He gripped the heavy vertical bars with trembling, pale hands. He screamed furiously through the narrow metallic gaps separating him from his former target. His deep voice cracked with genuine, unadulterated, primal panic. He viciously accused the serene, elegant woman standing inside the historical sanctuary of completely destroying his prestigious ancestral legacy. He shrieked about a massive, catastrophic federal environmental stop work order delivered just moments ago to his towering downtown corporate headquarters. Felicity maintained her flawless, impenetrable, stoic composure. She stepped slightly closer to the formidable physical barrier. She spoke with a crystalline, authoritative tone that sliced easily through the chaotic ambient noise outside the gates. She firmly reminded the hysterical, sweating man that strict municipal preservation laws exist for profound, crucial ecological reasons. She articulated exactly how his arrogant, ignorant construction crews deliberately bulldozed several pristine acres of protected coastal vegetation. That specific fragile biological network prevented catastrophic coastal soil erosion during violent seasonal Atlantic hurricanes. She calmly detailed the immense historical significance of the crushed 18th century masonry foundations he carelessly ordered completely destroyed just to pour cheap, modern cement footings. Her brilliant, flawless analysis left absolutely zero room for any favorable legal ambiguity. She expertly weaponized her extensive academic preservation expertise to thoroughly dismantle his fraudulent real estate empire. The sheer magnitude of his epic failure crushed his arrogant spirit. He spent years meticulously cultivating a flawless professional facade, precisely to hide his gross incompetence regarding large-scale property investments. He assumed his medical prestige would permanently shield him from any tedious bureaucratic scrutiny. He tragically underestimated the relentless, determined intelligence of the woman he arrogantly dismissed as a minor, trivial annoyance. Felicity utilized the very soil beneath his expensive leather shoes to engineer his ultimate, complete downfall. Preston stared blankly through the dark gates, fully comprehending the terrifying, absolute finality of her precise words. He instantly knew his major international financial backers would officially withdraw their massive funding portfolios by early Monday morning. The sprawling luxury waterfront condominium project was permanently dead. His immense inherited family fortune would completely evaporate beneath an insurmountable, crushing mountain of federal regulatory fines and aggressive civil litigation. A sudden, horrifying realization quickly washed over the defeated, greedy developer. He slowly turned his head away from the impregnable, lush estate. He finally noticed the bleak, devastating reality unfolding directly behind his expensive parked vehicle. He saw the local police officers forcefully reading mandatory constitutional rights to the hyperventilating older woman. He observed his supposed aristocratic, beautiful bride sitting helplessly in the dirt, wearing a ruined, stained mourning robe. He recognized the stark, undeniable, agonizing truth. The wealthy, powerful family he fully intended to secretly manipulate for emergency construction capital was actually completely destitute. Vivian and Caroline possessed absolutely nothing of true monetary value. They were fake, fraudulent, pathetic imposters drowning in immense hidden debt, exactly like him. The dark, poisonous, mutually beneficial alliance fractured spectacularly right there on the rural, uneven cobblestones. Preston marched aggressively toward the weeping younger girl. He did not offer a comforting, warm embrace or a reassuring, gentle whisper. He looked down at the sobbing, shaking figure with pure, unvarnished, visible disgust. He loudly declared the entire lavish matrimonial engagement officially, permanently terminated. His cruel, booming voice echoed loudly across the silent, stunned crowd of stranded catering vendors and shocked elite society guests. He verbally annihilated the broken bride, calling her a pathetic, worthless financial liability. He expressed supreme, furious outrage that he almost legally anchored his own sinking economic vessel to their ridiculous, pathetic social charade. Caroline gasped sharply, clutching her chest as if brutally struck by a physical, invisible blow. The absolute, ultimate romantic rejection from her handsome, wealthy savior finally pushed her fragile, fragile psyche completely past the psychological breaking point. She unleashed a guttural, agonizing wail of pure, unfiltered despair. Caroline had built her entire fragile universe around the singular, shallow goal of becoming a wealthy, influential physician wife. She willingly participated in the cruel deception against her own sister because she believed the spectacular ends justified the malicious means. Now stripped of her beautiful venue, her expensive floral arrangements, and her fraudulent aristocratic groom, she possessed zero remaining identity. She was simply a hollow, empty vessel, weeping pathetically on the side of a busy public highway. The surrounding elite guests, who previously admired her flawless beauty, now looked upon her pathetic state with undisguised, sickening pity. Vivian struggled violently against her tight, metallic restraints, screaming vicious, vulgar insults at the fleeing coward who unceremoniously abandoned them. The villains viciously tore each other apart, piece by bloody piece. They weaponized their shared, toxic, inherent cruelty against one another, abandoning any pretense of civilized behavior. Felicity quietly observed the spectacular mutual destruction from the safe, tranquil side of the property boundary. She stood completely untouchable, perfectly protected by her legally binding ownership documents and her undeniable, righteous moral high ground. Nathan wrapped his strong, calloused arm affectionately around her shoulders, radiating quiet, steady, peaceful comfort. They watched the poisonous, arrogant predators finally eagerly consume themselves, leaving nothing but ashes and public disgrace. The satisfying, flawless execution of this intricate revenge plot perfectly mirrored the rigorous demands of historical structural preservation. Felicity understood that true, lasting strength requires exposing the deep, hidden rot, tearing away the corrupted, decayed material, and rebuilding upon a solid foundation of undeniable, absolute truth. The toxic family members who constantly tried to bury her alive ultimately provided the exact, precise dirt she utilized to permanently bury them. However, the escalating morning drama had not quite reached its ultimate astonishing conclusion. While Preston yelled his final venomous insults at the arrested, hyperventilating matriarch, Jasmine stepped smoothly out from the dark shadow of the law enforcement barricade. The brilliant African-American compliance officer held a thick, pristine legal folder bearing the official golden seal of the United States Department of Justice. She walked deliberately toward the sweating, furious surgeon, physically blocking his path back to the damaged luxury vehicle. Jasmine smiled with lethal, cold, absolute professionalism. She calmly informed the disgraced, arrogant doctor that his immediate, dire problems extended far beyond simple environmental preservation violations. She announced, loud enough for the entire captivated assembly to clearly hear, that the federal prosecutor officially indicted him for massive charitable financial fraud. The missing hospital endowment funds were directly, successfully traced to his hidden offshore bank accounts just 1 hour ago. Preston froze, completely paralyzed by this astonishing, unexpected, catastrophic development. The surrounding police officers immediately drew their service weapons, ordering the stunned, ruined man to place his hands upon his head. A new, intense, high-stakes legal battle ignited instantly, leaving the audience thoroughly amazed and perfectly, completely satisfied. The brilliant, meticulous trap had finally snapped shut on every single deserving guilty soul, ensuring justice prevailed across every corrupted front. The oppressive heat of that chaotic Saturday morning eventually yielded to the sterile, air-conditioned chill of a downtown municipal holding facility. Maya secured a private conference room inside the bleak concrete courthouse for a highly anticipated final negotiation. Vivian sat perfectly rigid, wearing a bright orange institutional jumpsuit that completely clashed with her fading, expensive hair highlights. The arrogant matriarch still possessed a microscopic sliver of delusional defiance. She fiercely maintained her absolute innocence regarding the forged property documents and the illegal wire transfers. Maya gracefully opened a thick leather briefcase, extracting the indisputable digital evidence provided earlier by the brilliant compliance officer. The formidable corporate attorney laid out the terrifying reality facing the disgraced socialite. Federal prosecutors possessed enough financial documentation to ensure a lengthy, devastating prison sentence. Vivian stared blankly at the color-coded spreadsheets, finally realizing her superficial empire was permanently reduced to undeniable criminal evidence. Felicity entered the quiet interrogation room, radiating serene, confident authority. She wore a simple navy blue tailored dress, projecting an unyielding, powerful presence. Her mother instinctively attempted one final, pathetic emotional manipulation. Vivian begged for familial mercy, weeping synthetic, theatrical tears and invoking the supposedly sacred bonds of maternal love. Felicity remained entirely unmoved by the dramatic, desperate performance. She vividly remembered the countless childhood holidays spent isolated in her lonely bedroom, while Caroline received lavish gifts and unconditional, constant praise. Those painful historical memories fortified her resilient soul against any lingering toxic guilt. The brilliant preservationist placed a sleek silver pen and a blank official bank draft onto the cold metal table. The strict terms of absolute surrender were incredibly simple, yet profoundly psychologically devastating. Felicity absolutely refused to accept a single cent of the stolen $25,000 reservation deposit for her own personal bank account. She considered that specific currency forever tainted by malicious, selfish deceit. Instead, she demanded an immediate, direct financial transfer to the Charleston Historical Preservation Society. Vivian gasped in genuine, breathless horror at this highly specific, agonizing request. She had spent decades relentlessly mocking her younger daughter's chosen academic profession, labeling the noble pursuit a pathetic, tragic waste of intellectual potential. Now, her desperate, greedy obsession with high society validation would directly fund the exact career she viciously and publicly despised. The undeniable poetic justice tasted infinitely sweeter than any expensive imported vintage champagne. The broken older woman violently snatched the silver pen and angrily scribbled her required signature across the dotted line, sealing her own humiliating public fate and securing a heavily restricted plea agreement. Months quickly passed, sweeping the scandalous, explosive legal drama into the dusty, forgotten archives of local public gossip. The bitter, freezing winter winds eventually surrendered to the gentle, fragrant breeze of early, vibrant spring. Oakmont Estate underwent a magnificent, authentic architectural transformation under the meticulous, careful guidance of Nathan and his highly skilled, dedicated restoration team. They absolutely refused to utilize cheap, modern construction shortcuts or artificial synthetic building materials. They respectfully repaired the ancient tabby coastal foundations and carefully refurbished the original 18th century dark mahogany woodwork. The sprawling, historic rural property slowly regained its genuine, majestic soul, breathing fresh, vibrant life into the previously forgotten coastal landscape. Felicity spent her peaceful weekends wearing faded denim work overalls, planting native sweetgrass deep along the protective muddy shoreline. She finally reclaimed her profound spiritual connection to the beautiful raw earth beneath her sturdy leather boots. A glorious, radiant Saturday morning eventually arrived, marking the true, authentic, beautiful celebration of profound, enduring romantic love. The atmosphere surrounding the rural historic plantation completely lacked the frantic, desperate, anxious energy that heavily characterized the disastrous previous autumn. There were absolutely no rented massive canvas tents or arrogant, wealthy, judgmental strangers parading arrogantly across the manicured green lawns. Felicity stood quietly before a massive antique silver mirror inside the sunlit bridal suite, feeling genuine, warm, profound joy radiating throughout her entire physical body. Aunt Helene gently fastened a long row of delicate, tiny pearl buttons, tracing the back of her elegant, vintage lace wedding gown. The wise older woman possessed a quiet, steady, emotional intelligence earned through decades of observing her toxic, jealous sister manipulate their heavily fractured family tree. Helena kissed the beaming, beautiful bride softly upon the warm cheek, whispering a heartfelt, loving blessing of profound, ultimate future happiness. Jasmine walked gracefully into the spacious, bright room, holding a vibrant, massive bouquet of freshly gathered, colorful wildflowers. The brilliant financial compliance officer wore a flowing, soft pastel dress, entirely free from the stifling, rigid aesthetic expectations of her former, oppressive, elite household. Since the spectacular public legal implosion of the fraudulent medical dynasty, Jasmine had successfully filed for total, complete legal independence. She secured sole, absolute custody of her own immense private financial portfolio and permanently severed all remaining social ties with her disgraced, incarcerated former relatives. The two strong, resilient women shared a deep, silent, mutual understanding, recognizing the immense, brave strength required to survive their shared traumatic psychological past. They successfully forged an unbreakable, lasting sisterhood, built firmly upon mutual, deep respect and unwavering, solid moral courage, rather than superficial, hollow social climbing. Maya seamlessly completed the intimate, fiercely supportive circle, adjusting her stylish, dark designer spectacles while meticulously reviewing the final event timeline. The formidable elite corporate lawyer enthusiastically served as the officially designated ordained officiant for the upcoming romantic ceremony. She expertly traded her famously intimidating, aggressive courtroom demeanor for a bright, relaxed, joyful smile. The tight-knit, loyal group laughed easily, sharing funny, heartwarming personal stories while casually sipping sweet, sparkling apple cider. Nobody dared mention the miserable, ruined individuals currently awaiting their final sentencing hearings in federal district court. The toxic, heavy, dark shadows of Vivian, Caroline, and Preston were permanently, successfully banished from this sacred, joyful, protected sanctuary. The soothing, slow, rhythmic melody of a solitary acoustic wooden guitar floated gently upward from the lush, blooming botanical garden far below. Felicity took a deep, slow, grounding breath, feeling her chest swell with overwhelming, immense, profound gratitude. She walked deliberately slowly down the grand, curved wooden interior staircase, trailing her delicate, sweeping lace train across the polished, antique, smooth floorboards. The heavy, thick mahogany front doors swung wide open, revealing a breathtaking, stunning natural paradise bathed in warm, bright golden sunlight. A small, intimate, joyful gathering of 50 genuine, fiercely loyal friends turned their smiling, happy faces toward the beautiful, radiant, approaching bride. There were 0 cynical, judgmental, elite socialites evaluating her modest wardrobe or maliciously whispering cruel, unfounded rumors. Every single seated guest present genuinely, deeply cherished the happy couple and enthusiastically, loudly supported their shared, honest, romantic journey. Nathan waited patiently and proudly beneath the sprawling, massive branches of the ancient, historic oak tree. He wore a sharp, handsome, tailored charcoal suit, perfectly complementing his rugged, strong, masculine features. His bright, expressive, warm eyes reflected a deep, endless ocean of pure, unconditional, romantic adoration as he eagerly watched his gorgeous future wife approach the simple floral altar. Felicity glided softly, smoothly across the vibrant green cut grass, feeling deeply spiritually connected to the strong, resilient, unseen women who previously proudly walked this exact same historical rich soil. She absolutely did not require a massive, wealthy, critical audience to constantly validate her intrinsic romantic worth. She possessed everything she ever truly, deeply desired, standing right there, waiting patiently, securely, in the gentle, warm spring breeze. As Felicity finally joined hands with the honest, hard-working, dedicated man she deeply, profoundly loved, a massive, profound sense of total, peaceful, absolute closure washed completely over her weary soul. She had successfully, bravely navigated a treacherous, agonizing, dark labyrinth of familial, cruel betrayal and ruthless, greedy, criminal deception. She bravely emerged from that terrifying cold darkness, incredibly emotionally stronger and infinitely logically wiser. She successfully learned exactly how to firmly establish impenetrable, solid personal boundaries and fiercely, relentlessly protect her own invaluable, intrinsic human worth. The agonizing, deeply painful chapters of her troubled, toxic past were permanently, securely closed, paving a glorious, wide-open, clear road toward a bright, limitless, happy future. The joyful couple exchanged their heartfelt, beautiful written vows, pledging eternal, honest, faithful devotion amidst the fragrant, blooming southern coastal flowers. Maya proudly, officially pronounced them firmly, legally united, prompting a joyous, booming, loud cheer from the gathered, deeply supportive, happy crowd. Nathan gently pulled his brilliant, beautiful new bride into a passionate, tender, long kiss, sealing their unbreakable, solid, lifelong promise. The joyful, genuine, loud celebration echoed warmly, brightly across the fully restored, historic, sprawling estate, filling the humid, thick southern air with pure, unadulterated, sweet happiness. Looking out warmly across the vibrant, smiling faces of her chosen, fiercely loyal family, Felicity felt a brilliant, sudden spark of delightful, wicked, quiet amusement. She mentally briefly reviewed the astonishing, turbulent, chaotic journey that ultimately, successfully, brought her safely to this exact, perfect, peaceful destination. A quiet, confident internal voiceover echoed, clearly, brightly, through her peaceful, contented, resting mind, reflecting heavily upon the profound, hilarious, deep absurdity of traditional elite societal warfare. Sometimes the absolute most traditional, authentic, Southern thing you can possibly successfully do is smile politely, directly at your vicious, cruel enemies. Say, "Bless your sweetheart," with perfect, flawless, sweet diction, and successfully, relentlessly serve them with a massive, inescapable, binding federal injunction. We often believe that the ultimate destruction of a domestic dynasty occurs during a singular, catastrophic event. We imagine a sudden, explosive argument over a mahogany dining table or a dramatic hostile reading of a contested legal will. Yet watching the absolute collapse of the Coastal medical family reveals a much darker, nuanced reality. The initial seeds of total annihilation are almost never planted during adulthood. They are meticulously sown decades earlier within the quiet, hidden confines of a childhood nursery. When we examine the shattered physical wreckage of a forged society wedding and a confiscated luxury estate, we are not simply witnessing the logical consequence of federal wire fraud. We are observing the tragic, inevitable harvest of profoundly toxic parental guidance. Raising offspring within the complex competitive framework of modern American culture presents an immense psychological challenge. The relentless, intense pressure to project a flawless, affluent image frequently corrupts the fundamental sacred duty of parenthood. Mothers and fathers routinely mistake material provision for genuine emotional nourishment. They carefully curate a pristine outward facade while allowing silent rot to quietly consume the foundational floorboards of their private home. True familial responsibility requires an unwavering, absolute commitment to strict honesty, regardless of the immediate social cost. When a guardian demonstrates that calculated deceit is an acceptable standard tool for acquiring elevated status, they simultaneously hand their children the exact lethal weapons that will eventually destroy them. Consider the agonizing, polarizing dynamic deliberately forged between two vastly different siblings. One child constantly received endless showers of unearned praise and unlimited financial resources. The other endured a quiet, agonizing existence characterized by constant cruel dismissal and rigid emotional starvation. This grotesque psychological imbalance represents the most insidious, destructive form of invisible child abuse. Favoritism does not merely create temporary, fleeting childhood jealousy. It actively constructs a permanent, unbridgeable chasm of deep, lifelong resentment. When caretakers distribute their affection conditionally, basing their protective love upon superficial achievements or strict social compliance, they entirely strip their offspring of genuine internal security. A favored golden child never learns authentic resilience because they never face real, tangible consequences. A neglected shadow child either breaks completely under the immense, crushing weight of constant rejection or hardens into an impenetrable, fortified fortress of cold, calculating survival. The profound, absolute absence of emotional awareness serves as the primary invisible catalyst for multi-generational tragedy. To successfully guide a young, developing mind toward responsible, functional adulthood, a parent must actively cultivate deep, sincere empathy and rigorous, honest self-reflection. Children possess a terrifying, brilliant, innate capacity to absorb the unspoken, hidden values governing their household environment. If basic fairness is consistently treated as a disposable, optional luxury rather than an ironclad, non-negotiable law, the resulting adult will view every single human interaction as a zero-sum transactional game. The arrogant, disgraced surgeon and the delusional weeping bride fundamentally believed their elite inherited status granted them permanent, lifelong immunity from fundamental basic morality. Their deeply flawed parents explicitly taught them how to aggressively acquire temporal power, but completely failed to teach them how to possess a decent human soul. Consequently, when their fragile, fraudulent, synthetic empire inevitably collided with uncompromising harsh reality, They entirely lacked the internal structural fortitude required to survive the devastating impact. Rebuilding a genuine, honorable, traditional family structure demands a radical, complete departure from these toxic, superficial paradigms. True, enduring heritage is never accurately measured by the sheer size of an inherited offshore trust fund or the exclusive exclusivity of a restricted country club membership. Authentic, lasting legacy is strictly built upon a solid, unyielding bedrock of uncompromising integrity, mutual deep respect, and shared, honest, hard labor. When we raise our modern daughters and sons, we must fiercely prioritize their moral character over their academic credentials. We must instill the profound understanding that true, formidable strength lies not in manipulating vulnerable others, but in mastering oneself. They must clearly comprehend that genuine supportive love is not a magical protective shield against the logical consequences of their reckless actions, but rather a brilliant guiding light that demands their absolute highest personal effort. The vital path toward raising healthy, capable, independent individuals requires parents to bravely embrace personal vulnerability and freely admit their own inherent human flaws. The pursuit of absolute perfection is an impossible, highly destructive illusion. When responsible guardians openly model sincere accountability, they grant their young children the profound, necessary permission to make honest, inevitable mistakes and actually learn valuable lessons from them. This vital, crucial educational process fosters deep, robust emotional intelligence, ensuring the next generation can successfully navigate complex, treacherous moral landscapes with steady grace and quiet courage. A secure home should always serve as a safe harbor for authentic, honest expression, not a stressful theatrical stage designed specifically to impress passing, judgmental strangers. By actively fostering an environment of transparent, clear communication and equitable, fair treatment, parents construct a durable, strong, emotional safety net that will firmly support their grown children long after the physical childhood nest is entirely empty. The spectacular, humiliating public ruin witnessed at the locked iron boundary gates serves as a haunting, vital cautionary tale for every single guardian tasked with shaping a vulnerable young life. The staggering, heavy cost of prioritizing ruthless ambition over basic human ethics is ultimately paid by the very exact children we loudly claim to fiercely protect. We must actively, consciously, deliberately choose to break the destructive historical cycles of generational familial trauma. We must firmly refuse to pass down the heavy, rusty chains of our own unhealed, hidden insecurities. By dedicating ourselves completely to the difficult, unglamorous daily work of mindful, present parenting, we can successfully, permanently sever the toxic, bitter roots of eventual betrayal before they ever have a chance to sprout. We can proudly raise resilient individuals who value pure truth far above easy comfort and honor significantly above temporary influence. As you quietly reflect upon the intricate, dark webs of selfish deception and the brilliant, highly satisfying sting of ultimate poetic justice, I strongly encourage you to deeply examine the foundational values of your own private household. If you consistently crave more compelling, deep narratives that brutally expose the hidden psychological structural fractures within elite wealthy families, make sure to immediately follow Vega Vengeance. We constantly, passionately explore the fascinating, terrifying, dark intersection of extreme wealth, blind ambition, and total moral decay, bringing you unforgettable, gripping stories of harsh consequence and ultimate righteous reckoning. Ultimately, modern society constantly, loudly preaches that familial love must remain eternally unconditional, regardless of the severe abuse repeatedly inflicted. We are heavily culturally conditioned to blindly believe that sharing identical biological genetics automatically demands infinite, endless forgiveness, and perpetual silent sacrifice. This is perhaps the absolute most dangerous, comforting lie ever widely told. True, enduring, profound love actually requires rigorous, strict boundaries and the absolute firm willingness to let a toxic, dangerous relative completely drown in the bitter, freezing ocean of their own deliberate making. Sometimes the most profound, beautiful act of pure parental and familial guidance is actively allowing the cleansing fire of absolute total ruin to burn the entire artificial corrupted structure straight down to the literal ground. Only when the false synthetic temples are completely, entirely reduced to smoking gray ash can a truly magnificent, honest, permanent foundation finally be poured.